Today, I put together a collection of Reddit stories where reality wasn't what they thought. Stories where the main character goes in and the truth is revealed to them. Anyways, let's go ahead and get right into the first one. The first story today is from r/no sleep from user More Tanks. I'm a paramedic. We were called to a pregnant woman's house outside the city. Our shift was already well underway. 12 hours of non-stop pressure. Luckily, the night was shaping up to be quiet, or at least as quiet as it ever gets when you're a paramedic. So far, we'd only had 2 calls. An elderly woman slipped in her bathtub and fractured her femur. Calls like that were always hard. The elderly are helpless, vulnerable. Thankfully, her husband had called 911 in time. The other was a traffic accident. No serious injuries, fortunately. One of the drivers still had to be transported to the hospital for observation. After that, nothing. No more calls. We pulled into a gas station to take a break. Just me and Ruby. Ruby was almost 10 years younger than I was. When I first got her as a rookie, I wasn't thrilled. Training a young woman, being the one who had to show her the things the human body can do to itself when it breaks, it wasn't something I was eager for. But 4 years had passed since then, and Ruby had adapted. To wading through blood, to arriving too late, or too early, to the silence that settles in after a shift is over. Those things became routine for us, our crosses to bear. We carried them, and aside from each other, there wasn't really anyone else we could rely on. Ambulance 18, we have a call. The radio crackled to life, pulling me out of my thoughts. A pregnant woman has collapsed. This is 18, I replied immediately, grabbing the radio. What's the situation? We have limited information, the dispatcher said. The husband called it in. Can you respond and check it out? Copy that, I said, flipping on the siren to signal Ruby, who was outside by the gas pump, drinking her coffee. We're en route. We tore through the streets with the sirens screaming. The adrenaline always hit me like a wave in moments like that. We were flying, because in our line of work, time is everything. By then, I knew most routes by instinct. The MDT guided us all the way to the edge of the city. The road turned rough and uneven, and the GPS started giving us increasingly unreliable positioning. Ruby, ask dispatch for more precise address, I said, keeping my eyes on the rutted road. Dispatch, Ruby leaned closer to the radio. This is Ambulance 18. Can you confirm the exact location? Copy, Ambulance 18, the dispatcher replied, her voice crackling through the static. The husband says if you follow the old road, the first dirt road on the left leads to it. First mansion down that way. Copy that, dispatch, Ruby said, glancing at me. What is it? I asked, scanning the darkness for the dirt road. A mansion? Ruby shot me a sideways look. We're heading to rich people, Jacob. Hope you dress classy. I let out a tired laugh and finally turned onto the dirt road. Farther ahead, the outline of a massive building began to emerge. In the darkness, it barely revealed itself, like a sleeping mountain. Rich people don't live in places like that anymore, Ruby, I said, gesturing toward the old structure. That kind of thing went out of style. Ruby just smiled. The mansion looked both ancient and imposing. Its massive walls stretched upward into the night sky. Every window was shuttered, yet a faint glow leaked out from behind them, like the eyes of some enormous creature watching us. This is creepy, Ruby said flatly. A little, I replied as I pulled the ambulance to a stop in front of the mansion. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the mansion's grimy, time-worn walls. Shadows twisted and stretched like phantoms. For a brief moment, the thought crossed my mind that I didn't want to go inside. Then, as if something had sensed our hesitation, the massive front door swung open. A young boy ran out towards us, waving frantically. Hurry, hurry, the boy screamed in terror, and when he reached the ambulance, he began pounding on its side with his small fists. Ruby jumped out without a word, and I heard the rear doors of the ambulance swing open. I stepped out as well. The moment my boots hit the muddy ground, the boy grabbed my arm and started yanking me back and forth like a rag doll. Please hurry, he shouted. Hurry, my sister, please hurry. The boy wore simple clothes, made of old, heavy fabric. He looked like he had stepped out of another era, more like a medieval farmhand or an Amish child than a kid from the modern world. The flashing red and blue lights twisted his face into something grotesque. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and even then it was obvious something wasn't right about him. As cruel as it is to admit, my eyes passed over him with a reflexive grimace. "Hurry," the boy nearly screamed. "It's almost here. Please hurry." "Where are your parents?" I asked as I started moving with him toward the mansion. He tugged at my arm, spit running from his mouth in excitement, pulling me toward the open front door. Ruby caught up to us. The EMS bag hung from her shoulder as she watched the scene unfolding between me and the boy, her expression tight and uneasy. "Edmund," a voice suddenly boomed from the doorway. "Get away from there. Don't you have anything better to do?" Only then did I look up. A man stood in the doorway, like an apparition. It was hard to make him out in the darkness, but warm light spilled out behind him from inside the mansion. He was bald, older, probably around 60, and dressed in a long black wool garment, like a priest's robe. At the sound of the man's voice, the boy froze and fell silent. He was still gripping my hand, rocking slightly from side to side. "Jacob?" Ruby asked cautiously. Without warning, the boy let go of me and took off running, like a dog slipping its leash. He vanished in the dark night, between the trees, screaming for help, screaming about his sister. "Please come inside," the man said calmly. "Forgive Edmund. He's a difficult case. It didn't quite—" His sentence trailed off. Ruby and I exchanged a look. We hurried up the mansion steps, and suddenly I was standing in front of a massive black wooden door nearly 10 feet tall. Warmth and light poured out from inside. The man turned and headed in. Ruby and I followed. The man, dressed like a priest, didn't seem to be in any hurry. I could already tell Ruby was tense. She looked like she wanted to break into a run, just like we'd been trained. Get to the patient as fast as possible. Assess who's sick, how bad it is, how much help is needed. But the man only walked at an unhurried, almost leisurely pace. Maybe it was his age, or maybe he didn't think the situation was all that serious. Ruby and I followed him in measured silence. The mansion felt even larger on the inside than it had from the outside, and just as I had suspected, it was empty. No furniture, no decorations, no paintings on the walls, just an empty crypt. Only the lights were on, glowing yellow, dull and lifeless. Mansions like this were no longer inhabited by the old aristocracy. Our footsteps echoed through the vast, hall-like space as we moved across it. Ruby glanced at me as we walked. I only looked back at her briefly. I didn't want her to think I was just as uneasy as she was. We needed to stay calm. "Excuse me, sir?" Ruby finally broke the silence, impatience creeping into her voice. "Shouldn't we be moving a little faster? We were told a pregnant woman isn't doing well." The bald, thin man stopped short, as if genuinely surprised. Then, like a robot, he slowly and deliberately turned to face us. He tried to smile kindly, but on his tired, sunken face, the expression was unsettling. His deep gray eyes didn't settle on Ruby. They locked onto me instead, as if I'd been the one who spoke. "Now that you're here," the priest said calmly, "she'll be just fine." He flashed us a wide grin. His yellow, unkempt teeth stood out sharply against his pale face. I couldn't help the grimace that crossed my own. There was something deeply unpleasant about the man's presence. Then he turned away and shuffled forward along the same path as before. "What the hell?" Ruby whispered, falling a step behind. "Jacob, this is bad. This guy, the mansion, the kid, all of it." I know, I said quietly, trying to soothe her. "But this is where they sent us. We have to check on the woman." "Don't be naive," Ruby muttered. "There's no woman here." "She's here," the priest cut in, stopping beside a long, semicircular staircase that led up to the second floor. Ruby stared at the old man. I could tell he was getting under her skin, but there was nothing I could do about it. "She's upstairs?" I asked, partly to reassure Ruby, partly to convince myself. The man grinned at us again, teeth bared. "Yes," he said sweetly. "Upstairs. She needs help." I glanced sideways at Ruby. It was obvious she had absolutely no desire to go up there. "You're not coming with us?" I pressed. I was nervous now. I had a strong feeling that something up here was deeply wrong. We had no way of knowing whether there was actually someone upstairs who needed help. My legs aren't what they used to be, the man said, still smiling. I didn't respond, I just studied him. His cassock hung all the way to the floor. Slippered feet stuck out from underneath it, and he stood there as if he'd been nailed to the ground. "Father?" a voice called from above, from the very top of the stairs. Ruby and I both snapped our gaze upward at the same time. The priest didn't move. A young man stood at the last step. He was wearing a tuxedo, old-fashioned but elegant. His hair was neatly combed, his thin mustache carefully groomed. He looked like one of those refined gentlemen from old British TV shows. "Leave it to me," the young man said. "I'll escort them." With that, he hurried down the stairs. He stopped in front of me and, without a moment's hesitation, extended his soft hand. "Reginald," he said, gently shaking mine. "A pleasure, and thank you for coming. This way, please. My wife isn't feeling very well." I glanced back at Ruby, and her face said everything. I was sure that if I didn't insist, she'd already be back in the ambulance, calling for backup. But we had to go up there. We had to find out what was going on with the woman. Yes, these people were strange, like they were a few hundred years out of step with the rest of the world, but we weren't in danger. Not yet. Side note, guys, I get that they need to get to the patient, but call for some sort of backup, because I'm not trusting Reginald. Reginald's creeping me out. By the way, is anyone else thinking of the Addams Family? Because they reminded me of the Addams Family. Anyways, let's continue. Reginald moved through the empty hallways and rooms like a ghost. We still weren't moving as fast as we normally would have, but the size of the mansion itself felt unnaturally vast, as if it kept stretching farther the deeper we went. We were making our way down a long corridor when one of the old wooden doors beside us suddenly creaked open. Reginald reacted instantly, stepping in front of it as if to block our view. "Vivian, why are you out here?" he scolded, his tone sharp and dismissive. Ruby slipped closer to my side, trying to see past Reginald and catch a glimpse of what I was seeing. A blonde little girl stood in the doorway. Her hair was messy, only half contained beneath a white headscarf. From the dim light inside, it looked like the room was some kind of bedroom. I thought it was time already," the girl muttered quietly. "Not yet, sweetheart," Reginald said, gently stroking her cheek. As cute as the girl might have been, her cleft lip made her appearance deeply unsettling. In the darkness behind her, another small figure with an oversized head sat up in a bed, peering out curiously. "That's enough, children," Reginald raised his voice. "Back to bed, all of you." With a firm, unquestionable motion, he ushered the girl back into the room and shut the door behind her. "Kids," Reginald muttered, shaking his head theatrically. "Yeah," I said, grimacing. Reginald didn't respond. He only tested the doorknob once more to make sure it was locked, then continued on without offering any explanation. "Jacob, this isn't right," Ruby whispered again. "We should call dispatch, get the police out here." "For what, Ruby?" I hissed back. "There's nothing concrete to call the cops for. Yeah, they're weird, and this whole place gives me the creeps, but what am I supposed to say? That there are creepy kids in a bedroom?" Ruby shot me a hard look. I knew she was right. I could feel it in the air, in the walls, that something here was very wrong. But what could I do? "You coming?" Reginald called out, already far ahead of us. "We're almost there. My wife really needs you." Ruby didn't take her eyes off me. Her stare was both commanding and desperate at the same time. "We're coming," I called back. Then more quietly, "Come on, Ruby, let's at least check on the woman. If anything gets even more suspicious than this, we'll call for backup." Ruby's lips trembled. I knew she wanted to say something, argue, protest, but there was no time. I just wanted to get this over with and leave this place behind. "And here we are," Reginald said as he turned left at the end of the corridor. We stopped in front of a door. It looked just like all the others we'd passed, except for the massive, dull-eyed man standing guard beside it. "Hello," I said when I noticed the hulking brute. He grunted in response. I'm sorry. He wore huge, crooked suspenders over his clothes. The scarring on his chin suggested he'd only recently grown out of his teenage years. yet his size and filthy smeared face made him look much older. The large man stared into nothingness with his mouth hanging open. Ruby pressed close to me, scanning everything with the tense alertness of a frightened cat. "Oh, right," Reginald said, placing his hand on the doorknob. "Before we go in, please put on gloves and masks. You do have them with you, correct?" "Of course we do," I replied suspiciously. "We would have put our gloves on anyway." Yes, he nodded playfully. "You know, pathogens and all that. We've tried to keep the room sterile inside." I stopped listening to Reginald's rambling. Ruby set her bag down and pulled out a pair of medical gloves. We both kept an eye on the dull-witted man as she did. He was leaning against the doorframe, casually picking his nose, then eating what he'd just pulled out. So much for sterile. After I put on my medical mask as well, Reginald nodded in satisfaction, almost cheerfully, then pressed down on the doorknob without any warning. We waited, almost holding our breath, finally expecting to reach the person we'd actually been called for. But the miracle didn't come. Again. The door opened into an antechamber. Gray wallpaper, a damp, musty smell. The chandelier cast a warm light over the room, and suddenly I had the same feeling I used to get back when I was younger, helping out at AA meetings. Chairs lined the walls, old plastic chairs. People were sitting in them. The men all wore dark, heavy fabric clothing. The women were dressed in long black skirts. It looked like some kind of Amish discussion circle. But their faces were wrong. Melted noses, clouded eyes, mouths without lips, missing noses or ears. An aberrant, twisted congregation holding a group meeting. Ruby was practically stepping on my heels. Even so, I could see the terror on her face. Her hand trembled near the radio clipped to her white uniform shirt. I had the distinct feeling that if even a single one of them moved, Ruby would be ready to call it in immediately. "Looks like a lot of people live here," I said to Reginald, who gently ushered us farther into the room. "Oh, they don't live here," Reginald explained. They're just part of the family. You know, they came because of the baby." "Of course," Ruby muttered nervously. The twisted gathering stared at us. They watched blankly as Reginald moved through them like a gentleman, and we followed behind him slowly, barely breathing. Reginald walked up to the next door and opened it once more. The room beyond was dim. Only a small lamp was on, outlining the shape of the bed hidden behind some kind of curtain, like a canopied bed. "Jacob?" Ruby whispered behind me, her voice trembling with fear. "Yes, Ruby," I whispered back as quietly as I could. "I hear it too." A woman's painful moaning drifted out of the room. It was faint, a whimpering kind of pain, like someone trying to speak while burning with fever. "Right this way," Reginald said from the doorway. "Ah, it's so dark in here." With that, he flipped on the light. Now, it wasn't just the silhouette of the bed behind the curtain. Something enormous lay on it, like a pile of pillows stacked into a single mound. Ruby and I stood frozen in the doorway. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, grab Ruby, and run out of that haunted mansion as fast as I could. "My dear," Reginald said, stepping toward the curtain. "The doctors are here, or whatever they are. They've come to help." Then he pulled the curtain aside. I've seen a lot in my life, but neither Ruby nor I was prepared for this. A woman lay thrashing on the bed. She moved with difficulty, her head lolling from side to side. Only the remnants of her clothing covered her body, enough to suggest she'd once worked at a bistro or somewhere similar. Her hands were bound to the bed, like a slave's. And her stomach was the size of a massive sack. Her skin was stretched paper thin, the veins beneath it looking as if they were about to rupture. The light reflected off it like a taut, translucent membrane. It was so large that a full-grown man could have fit inside. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring. And I wish, dear God, I wish that Ruby had stayed frozen too. "What the hell?" Ruby gasped in horror. I reached for her hand, trying to stop her from moving, but she recoiled in fear. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her back into the crowd behind us. While we stood there, stunned by the woman on the bed, those things from outside had crept up behind us. "Screw you, let go of me," Ruby screamed. Chaos broke loose. Everything accelerated. I spun around, grabbed Ruby's arm, and pulled her close to me. With my other hand, I shoved away a short, lipless figure that lunged toward us. The crowd stayed clustered in the doorway, unmoving. I kept hold of Ruby, backing away from the door and the grotesquely swollen woman. "All right, everyone, back," I shouted, trying to mask my terror. "Easy now," Reginald said calmly from beside the bed. "Just help my wife. Nothing bad will happen. It's your duty to help those in need." "Like hell it is," I snapped. "I don't know what the hell you're doing here, but we're leaving. Now." Reginald stared at me, eyes wide. Shock washed over his face, as if it had never occurred to him that I might refuse. "You can't do that," he burst out. "This woman has carried the Lord of Worlds for 3 years. You can't abandon her now." Ruby and I kept backing away until we were nearly against the wall. The crowd responded to the argument by pushing farther into the room. "Jacob," Ruby whispered beside me, pointing at the woman on the bed. Only then did I see it too, and so did Reginald, who had been standing at her side. The woman's stomach rippled, her face twisted in agony, sweat beading on her forehead as her skin went pale. The signs were unmistakable. "No, no," Reginald cried out in panic. "Not yet." He pressed his head against the stretched membrane of her stomach, listening for movement inside. The bound woman screamed in pain. Blood poured onto the bed as the woman screamed in agony. Thin streams of red flowed onto the floor like a spring. Ruby and I couldn't move. The scene was pure horror. "Damn," Reginald whispered. He suddenly jumped back from the woman as if something were chasing him, then bolted through a door at the far end of the room, slamming it shut behind him. The crowd erupted into wailing, like mourners at a funeral. They clawed at their faces and heads, screaming and sobbing. Ruby stood frozen, but we couldn't stay there. I nudged her shoulder gently and gestured toward the door Reginald had escaped through. I tried to slip between the bed and the crowd while they were lost in their collective hysteria. Then something appeared. A horrifying figure began to emerge, something that didn't look human. Ruby and I were living through the worst nightmare of our lives. "Jacob, help me," the thing said, its voice coming from the woman's body. That was when panic took over. We had to run now. I bolted for the door, dragging Ruby with me. The crowd surged forward, pouring after us like a living tide. Everything blurred, spinning out of control. I slammed into the door, locked. I caught one terrified glance from Ruby. Then I threw myself at it again. The rotting wood gave way, and I crashed into the next room. Ruby stumbled in after me. But something was wrong. Ruby staggered. Red spread across her white uniform. Something was buried in her side. Her face went pale, and maybe fueled by adrenaline, she managed a few more steps before collapsing in the middle of the room. "No!" I screamed. A one-eyed, pig-faced figure stood in the doorway, glaring at me. I hit him so hard I saw red spray from his nose onto the doorframe. The crowd kept pushing forward. An enormous woman with no nose charged me. I kicked her square in the chest. She flew backward, knocking others down with her. I jumped back into the room and slammed the door shut. I braced it, then spotted a heavy wardrobe right beside it. I shoved it in front of the door. "Help me, Jacob," a voice cried from the other side. It was the thing. I leaned into the wardrobe, holding the door shut as fists slammed against it from outside. They howled and pounded like animals. My eyes dropped to Ruby lying on the floor. She was badly hurt. Panic flooded me. "Ruby," I shouted. "Ruby, wake up. Don't do this to me." She didn't move. The knife was buried deep in her side. I left the door and rushed to her. Her pulse was barely there. Her face was growing paler by the second. Red seeped from around the blade. The jump bag was still by the bed in the other room. "Dispatch, this is Ambulance 18, I yelled into my radio. "Send backup. Anyone. Police, ambulances. A medic is down." The radio crackled, then went dead. No response. "Dispatch!" I screamed, already crying. The door creaked as the wardrobe was pushed aside. Hands forced their way through the gap. A man's blood-red face tried to squeeze through, screaming and snarling. "Ruby, please, don't do this to me," I sobbed. I didn't get to finish. The door burst open. The twisted figures flooded in. A tall, thin man lunged at me. I tore him off and slammed him to the floor. Survival instinct and raw rage fought together inside me. A man slammed into my side and knocked me away. Another landed a heavy blow to my face. I staggered but stayed upright. I had to. Another figure grabbed my throat with both hands and started choking me. I drove my fist into his stomach. He doubled over, clutching himself. Two men rushed me at once. One clawed wildly at my face. The other latched onto me like dead weight. I backed up. In the dim light, I didn't see the woman I'd struck earlier, writhing on the floor. I tripped over her and crashed straight into the window. Under the combined weight of three bodies, the glass shattered, and we went through it. I hit the muddy ground with a brutal impact. One of them hanging on the gutter, like a decoration. Another violently landing on the ground. I lay there, barely breathing, staring into the dark night. I couldn't move. Pain surged through my body as I felt my dislocated arm start to throb. "Reginald messed it up again," a childish voice said gently. Edmund crouched beside me. He was holding a snail in his hand, calmly studying my broken body. "But I'm sure he'll start over," the boy said, then crushed the snail in his bare fingers. And then everything went black. When I came to, dawn was already breaking. My body ached, throbbed. I was sure there wasn't a single bone left in me that hadn't been damaged. But my legs, no matter how much they hurt, still worked. I struggled to my feet. My hands were badly injured. I could only breathe in ragged gasps, and a sharp pain stabbed through my side. I reached for my radio, but my fingers brushed against jagged plastic. It was shattered. I don't even remember when it broke. I started moving slowly, dragging my feet, but not toward the ambulance, not to call for help. I went back into the mansion. I couldn't leave Ruby up there. I had to see her. I had to know what happened to her. But, to my shock, everyone inside was dead. I found the priest, too. He was sitting on the stairs. His eyes rolled back, dried blood-tinged foam crusted at the corner of his mouth. I found a room filled with deformed children as well. They had ended up just like him, every single one. By the time I reached the horrific room upstairs, the world was spinning around me. But there were no living people there either. Every body lay sprawled across the floor, the bed, or whatever surface they had collapsed onto. Ruby was gone. Only a massive pool of red remained, marking where she had once been. But she wasn't the only one missing. Among the dead, Reginald was nowhere to be found. That's when Edmund's words echoed through my dizzy mind. But I'm sure he'll start over. This was a highly creepy story, and I feel like it fit the theme very well. It started as a typical 911 call, and then they end up in a mansion with a cult and a weird birth ritual. The next story today is from r/no-sleep from user Downtown Football 248. I was a security guard at Outer Lights Productions for 15 years. I'm ready to confess about what happened there. I don't know what compelled me to confess here of all places. Maybe all the years in the pews caught up to me, took in the good word. Or maybe it's the lingering prognosis that has me crawling my way back to Jesus. I don't know. Either way, I'm ready to talk. From what I read, this is the type of group to listen. Father Lincoln says that sins are like roots. You don't fully get them up unless you dig out the hole, right down to where it all started. He wears clothes to forgive. The internet throws words to condemn. To be frank, I could use a little bit of both. So, let's dig it all out. Back to the first day of many mistakes. Oh, and lock the freezer after showtime. Come again? I said, finishing the last swirl of my signature. That's the last part of the gig. Russborough coughed out as he inhaled that last bite of his cronut, showering the table and both of us in buttery flakes. Studio closes just before sunset. You get here 15 minutes earlier, do your tasks, and lock the freezer no later than 7 p.m. Why does the studio own a freezer? He leaned back and swallowed. A deep breath wheezed in and out of him, indecisive on whether it was for annoyance or contemplation. He had heard that question before, many times. His dense monobrow suggested he was considering whether he would have to hear it again. Do you want this job? The chill from the previous night's air still lingered in my bones. I was out of gas and had only 2 blankets to my name. That rat cloth I had gotten from St. Mary's wasn't holding up as we ran into October, and I don't know how many more nights in the Acura I could handle. Yes, sir, I do. It won't work out if you're curious. Believe me. Some doors, better left shut. I sat with that. Nothing about it sounded good. I'd heard the stories about these Hollywood types. Was it a vat of baby oil? A baby plantation to harvest fresh stem cells? The more my mind wandered, the more I wondered if I could handle whatever it was. If it were horror beyond my stomach, what would I do? Then my eyes landed on the contract again, and the length of the zeros made me unsure. Lock it after 7. Got it. No later than 7, kid. That's important. All right, I got it. Russborough didn't seem pleased with that, but he reached into his bottom desk drawer and pulled out my gear. An outer light security hat, a metal clipboard case with a laminated paper taped to the front of that had the word checklist bold at the top in faded red letters, and a Glock 19. Whoa, I get issued a gun for this job? You got a problem with that? No, I just didn't expect it. Do studios typically have armed security? His eyes sat half open, unamused. He reached over to the black security hat, analyzed it, then matted it down on my head. Do now, he smiled. His extra cheek fat curled around the corners of his lips, creating an echo of a double smile like he was silently laughing at me. Listen, the talent we have here requires a bit of extra protection. I ain't no yuppie. If someone tries to get to where they ain't supposed to be, you use that. You hear? I nodded. Anyway, he brushed away some arm hair infringing on his Rolex. Shift starts in about an hour. Why don't you watch from the screening room? Is that okay? Course. Welcome to the Outer Lights family. I left Russborough's office and made my way to the screening area. The Glock heavy at my side. Always such a light thing in the hand, but heavy on my hip and in my guts. I'd never gotten used to it. I fired plenty in my life. A lot less since leaving Beaumont PD that spring, but still. Authority. The power to do what needed to be done. Such big things. You think you know what you'd do, how you'd act in a situation where you needed to pull that trigger, to be someone's hero. Then you get to the moment and just about shit yourself. The screening room was dead, save for 3 individuals. The first was a man in his late 40s. The studio lights blinded me from the reflection off his head. Wafts of cigarette smoke enraptured him as he sat, watching the talent perform from his director's chair. To his immediate left, at the foot of the stage, was someone in an all-black suit, sunglasses indoors. Total G-man. He was the only one who turned to me the moment I opened the door. He saw my hat and gave me a faint nod of acknowledgement. I didn't return it, but it was the man on stage who stole my attention. Atop the stage, centered by 6 lights of soft white, blood red, and sapphire blue, was the star. He was young, no more than 23. Dusty blonde hair, striking green eyes, and a grin that said he knew more than you did. Draped over his shoulders was a scarred blue suit coat, painted with grime and old blood. He was shirtless underneath and had a gun in his hand. He looked down at it in his lap, switching his expression in an instant. I was never a movie type, but I could see his thoughts. He went from a generalized sorrow to now thoughts of impending oblivion. If she were actually here, we would have Margory enter stage left, the director said. I could now see the name Stillwell on the back of the chair. Can we get an intern or something to read her lines to Thomas? The man in the suit nodded at him and looked behind the curtain on the stage. At his glance, a frail 19 or something jogged out, her brow drenched in sweat, a script in hand. Everyone stopped, waiting for each other to continue, until the director scoffed. It's your line, sweetie. Oh, sorry, she mumbled, flipping to the page in a frantic rush. She cleared her mousy throat and continued the scene in a jilted performance. Isaac, just put the gun down. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. They're gone, Alyssa. What do you mean, they're gone, Isaac? What happened? Where is everyone? Thomas, now fully his character Isaac, looked to her, his brow pinched into a grimace, lip quivering, eyes misty. Alyssa. Isaac, where are the others? What about me? I'm right here, having to live with it. His eyes fell back on the gun. Isaac, where are they? How can you ask me that? He said, looking to her now. Don't you dare look at me like that. You don't get to judge me. You didn't make those choices. You didn't feel the hunger we felt. Stillwell spoke, reading the stage direction, and the actors followed suit. As Isaac starts to cry, Alyssa hugs him, embracing the truth of what he did in those mountains, what they chose to do to survive. She buries herself in his shoulder, apologizing for everything. But Isaac looks on to the mountain, looking on to what was left behind. Was it his friends or all of himself? Thomas then looked to the seats, right at me. His eyes gripped me like 1,000 pleading hands, begging me to stare. Goose flesh broke out all over my body as he spoke. The jungle stole their lives, but I stole their souls, with every bite. Cut. Thomas snapped up, ignoring the intern. You don't think that line at the end is too much? Stillwell raised an eyebrow. It wraps the story up well. Yeah, but what about just, I stole their souls? I mean, the audience already knows I nibbled on my friends up there. Sorry, guys. I don't know why I'm imagining this guy as like Timothy Chalamet. Anyways, let's continue. Stillwell looked at his watch. It was 6 p.m. He looked back at Thomas, and they had a silent conversation about that. It's a good point, Tom. I'll consider it on the rewrite. We'll pick up tomorrow when Margory is here and not coked out in a Denny shitter or wherever the fuck she is. Let's clear out so security can close up shop. They did. Not a single word or glance at me. I watched the room clear, and in a few minutes, it was just me. The majority of the checklist I had to do were basic items. Cut the power to the stage, conduct walkthroughs at 3-hour intervals, ensure building access points are secure by 6:30, all standard stuff I'd done before in some fashion. I knocked them out swiftly and was left with the last 3 items, the first of which gave me pause. Let in the groupie? I read. I followed the instructions, making my way to a service entrance deep in the heart of the studio. I opened the door, mostly to get a view of what to expect, when I heard a short scream as someone scattered to the ground. I looked down to see a young girl on her knees, looking up at me with a wounded expression. She was a frail thing. Pencil skirt, low-cut top, curly brown hair, a dense amount of foundation, and clashing red lipstick. Sorry, I said, helping her up. I didn't see you there. It's okay, she said, though I could tell it wasn't. Still, she made an effort to put me at ease, and I appreciated that. I gave her a once-over and saw she now sported a small splotch of crimson on her left knee. Let's get you a bandage for that. It looks like a good scrape. No, that's okay. I'll clean it up in the bathroom. I insisted. While cleaning her up, I found out her name was Regina. She was 20, or so she told me, and that she was so thankful to be here. However, when the hydrogen peroxide hit her skin, her positive energy crumbled, and she stomped her good leg as if I was amputating the other. So, you know the actor, Thomas? I asked, hoping to distract her. It worked. She lit up like Figaro Corridor. No, but I really want to. We met at a coffee shop while I was practicing my lines. I'm an actress. Uh-huh, I said as I finished wrapping her bandage. He was so sweet. Said he really liked my stuff and asked if I could swing by after he finished rehearsal. I was sure Thomas did like some of her stuff, but I didn't have the heart to tell her. The girl was too young for me to be crushing her dreams. I looked over at the checklist as she prattled on for another minute or two. Next item up was take groupie to talent manager. Well, let's get you backstage. As we turned around into the hallway, I all but crashed into suit. All my years there, and I never learned his name. He stood there like a brick wall in both size and demeanor. 6:43, he grunted. Sorry? He tapped his watch. You're late. She was supposed to be with me at 6:35. Yeah, sorry. She fell on the way in, and I wanted to get her patched up first. He looked at her, snatched off his glasses, and dropped to his knees, analyzing her wound. Regina shifted back and forth as he glared at her leg, but she did well otherwise to hide her discomfort. Then Suit clicked his tongue in disapproval. Not good. What? It's just a scrape. Yeah, I'm fine. He stood up, looked at me, and shrugged. We'll see, I guess. You're the one who's going to hear about it. I didn't know what that meant, but he didn't give me any more time to contemplate it. Follow me, ma'am. She did, like a giddy dog. I watched them walk off, some sinking feeling in my gut, but I wasn't sure from what. Was it for her? Or was it because of Suit's words? As I reflected on that, Regina looked back at me before she went around the corner, waved and smiled, then she was gone. One item left. No earlier than 6:55, but absolutely no later than 7, locked the freezer. I opened up the clipboard case, and inside was one of the most archaic locks I had ever seen. A massive steel padlock with a 2-inch thick iron key. I glanced at my watch, and the time read 6:54. Shit. My jog broke into a sweat-soaked sprint as I dove further into the studio. The lights in the corridor getting further and further apart. In my panic, I hadn't realized I was following Suit and Regina's steps. I thought they must have taken a different route, but as I followed the studio map more, I knew that wasn't the case. This was a one-way path. 3 minutes to the deadline. I made it to the staircase that descended into the earth. A pitch-black void into nothing, illuminated only by a single slit at the bottom, where the freezer door was barely ajar. I crept down. Sweat broke out on my neck. When I made it to the hallway, careful to avoid each creak and groan of the floorboards, I heard voices coming from inside. What the hell is this? What happened to her knee? This voice was new, deep, no, thunderous. It rolled up the stairs like the boulder trap from Indiana Jones. When it reached me, my brain struggled to process it into language. She fell. That one was clearly Suit. She fell? That's what the security guard said. And what am I supposed to do with that? You know she won't heal. I understand, sir. No, you don't. Chains rattled. Something large was lifted and thrown, crashing into the wall below. The metal walls belted as the hard mass bent and warped the steel. Worry plunged into my heart as they described Regina. My hand snapped to my gun as I descended, quickening my pace. Calm down, Suit shouted. It's a scrape. She's exactly what you wanted otherwise. She was perfect, the voice rumbled in an almost melancholy way. It swelled in my stomach like the bass of some ballad. She still is. Do you know how hard it is to find someone with the exact chest you wanted? She even has an inverted navel. Find another then. This one is ruined. No. What did you say? The voice seethed. Just please, can you at least try it on? It was then that I made it to the door. My eyes instantly searched through the crack. The freezer was filled with bodies. They weren't hung on hooks like food, but in neat, vacuum-sealed rows of industrial hangers, like a macabre closet. Just beyond the door was Suit, his back to me. Beyond him, Thomas stood in front of an unconscious Regina. Then his head snapped up. His jaw separated from his skull with a brutal crunch. A 2-foot gray hand sprouted from Thomas's throat and used his forehead as leverage to pull the rest of it out. Another hand came out, then another. When the body that was Thomas crumbled to the ground like a skin suit without any bones, a writhing mass of floating hands, branching out of some undulating distortion in space, floated before Regina. At 6:59, the hands pried open her mouth and crawled in, inch by inch, cracking and breaking bone as it tunneled itself inside of her. My hand was glued to my gun. I knew I should run in, save her. That was my job, right? To protect and serve? At least it was, and once again I was here. All the power, all the authority, and all I could do was nothing. I knew that poor kid didn't deserve this, and as that conflict rolled within me, Suit turned around to face me. He wore an expression of pure indifference. No hate, surprise, or worry. He shook his head. A warning. But was it for me, not against? As the horror before me unfolded, I was right back to where I was 2 years ago, watching those masked men enter O'Leary's, guns in hand, while I idled outside my cruiser. Just like then, I froze at the door handle, my body torn down the middle by the fence I had planted my ass on. My body, my mind, screaming in refusal as I compelled it to go. I wanted so bad to be strong enough, to do my job, the right thing. The seconds of the clock evaporated towards 7 p.m. I heard Rusborough's words from our interview. As those people threw Mr. O'Leary onto the ground, beating him for petty cash, and as the bones of Regina crunched and crushed under the weight of Thomas's hands, I made the same choice that I did then. I locked the door. And this one starts out with a security guard getting a job at a movie studio. Yeah, there's something that's inhuman living beneath the movie studio. The next story today is from r/no sleep from user financialtop6609. The road near my house has been closed for 2 weeks. There was never a gas leak. I'm sorry, because what I'm about to tell you will sound like the kind of BS people make up when they want strangers online to pay attention. But made-up stories don't park 2 black SUVs outside your house every night for 2 weeks and pretend not to watch your windows. Believe me, don't believe me. That's not really why I'm writing this. Just know the road near my old house is still blocked. They say it's because of a gas leak. There's no gas line there. We had electric everything because Dinah was scared of open flames. She said indoor fire felt primitive and wrong, and I thought she was just being dramatic. That's funny now, in a sick way. Dinah and I had been married for 10.5 months. We were stupid in love, embarrassing love. The kind where one of us would leave to buy something and the other would already be texting before they reached the store. We fought too, badly, over nothing, over dishes, over my work at the research institute, over her saying I wasn't really listening, over me saying she always sounded like she was translating normal human emotions from a manual. That one made her cry. I apologized for it for 2 days. I didn't know then how close I was. The night it happened, I came home late. I was shaking from coffee and hunger and whatever you call it when your whole life has just cracked open. I had done it. Not the final machine, obviously, but the math. The ugly part. The part everyone said was impossible. Star drive. Faster than light. Whatever name you want. I don't know what they'll call it when they finally show you, if they ever do. I had it in my bag. Dinah had dinner ready. That should have scared me right away because Dinah did not cook when she was happy. She cooked when she was trying not to fall apart. There were candles on the table, cheap ones. One had burned down into this sad little blob. Pasta, garlic, wine. She was wearing my shirt. Bare legs, hair still wet from the shower. God, she was beautiful. That's the thing I hate most. Not that she lied, not that I was just a chore, that I can still see her and want her. She said, "You're late." I said, "You're scary." She laughed, but not right. A little too late. You know how you learn someone, not the big stuff, the tiny stuff. How they breathe when they're mad. How they say fine when it's absolutely not fine. How they kiss you when they want to hang out with you versus when they want forgiveness. That laugh was wrong. But I wanted to ignore it. I wanted dinner and her in that stupid little moment where I got to tell my wife I had done something impossible. So I ignored it. She came over and kissed me before I even put my bag down. Hard kiss. Teeth, wine, salt. Like she was mad at my mouth. Then there was a bitter taste. "What the hell is that?" I said. Or I tried to. My tongue got thick. My fingers went numb. My bag slid off my shoulder and hit the floor. Dinah caught me. Caught me like I weighed nothing. That was another thing she forgot to hide. She lowered me down on the kitchen tile. Gentle. Like I was drunk and she was embarrassed for me. I couldn't move. Not couldn't move like panic. Couldn't move like my body had been unplugged. I could breathe, barely. I could see. I could hear. I could feel the cold tile under my cheek. She sat on the floor and pulled my head into her lap. Then she wiped spit from my chin with her thumb. That almost broke me. I know that sounds pathetic, but when someone poisons you and still wipes your mouth because she can't stand seeing you like that, your brain doesn't know where to put it. She was crying by then. Quietly. Not movie crying. Ugly crying. Nose running, shoulders shaking. Trying not to make noise, which was very Dinah, because even then she didn't want to make it about her. Then she explained just enough. People in stories explain too much. Real people don't. Real people choke on half of it and repeat themselves. She wasn't from here, not from Earth. She had been sent because of me. Not because I was special, because I might become special. Her people had ways of knowing which humans were likely to open certain doors. My name came up. She was supposed to get close, slow me down, push me left when I should have gone right. And she did, for a while. The job I didn't take. The paper I gave up on. The night she pulled me back to bed when I was close to something. The trip she begged me to take right before a deadline. The fights. Jesus, the fights. They had told her to kill me months earlier. She didn't betray them. She stalled. That was all her love was worth in the end. She said humans couldn't be allowed out there. We liked playing with fire too much. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We were too fast, too angry, too good at turning pain into tools. She said that part like she hated us. Then she touched my face like maybe she was hoping love had finally worn off. It should have been simple. Kill the husband, take the math, get on the ship. Hero of whatever the hell she came from. Her people were coming for her before dawn. I would be dead. My lab would burn in a way that looked like my fault. Clean. That word made me want to laugh, but my mouth didn't work. Clean. My wife sat there holding me like she used to after panic attacks, except this time she was the reason I couldn't move. You're probably thinking I was a naive idiot. Some dead-eyed scientist who knew math, but not his own wife. Too busy chasing equations to notice what was sleeping next to him. I wasn't. I actually had known for months. Not known like I had a photo of her with antenna or whatever stupid thing you're imagining. I was definitely imagining an antenna. I knew the way husbands know things and then hate themselves for knowing. She was wrong in small places. The first real crack was a cut on her hand that closed while I was still reaching for a towel. She laughed it off and said I'd imagined how bad it was. The second was finding her barefoot in the yard at 3 a.m, whispering into the dark while every insect in the grass had gone silent. There were other things too, small things. Things you can explain once, maybe twice, until explaining them starts to feel stupider than the truth. Eventually, I called an old friend of my dad's. I didn't want to. I sat with the phone in my hand for almost an hour because making that call meant admitting that the thing in my bed was not my wife in any normal sense. He didn't sound shocked. That scared me more than anything. He asked me 3 questions, very calmly, and by the third one I understood he already knew what she was. Then he said, "Do not confront her. Do not try to leave. If she thinks you know, you won't survive the night." That was when it landed properly. Dinah wasn't a mystery anymore. She was a placement. She was there for me, for the work, and sooner or later she was going to have to finish what she had been sent to do. Which is exactly what happened. Then I met the others. Men and women with normal clothes and dead faces, asking questions nobody should know to ask. Not just about Dina, about our fights, her blood, her sleep, the words she used when she was angry, whether she ever got sick, whether animals acted strange around her, whether lights flickered when she touched them, whether I had ever woken up and found her watching me. Nobody looked shocked enough. That was when I learned that they had been chasing this for years. Not aliens exactly, traces, shadows, bad transmissions, burned bodies, missing scientists, houses cleaned too well, bodies found with organs that did not fail in any way, human medicine understood. Nothing whole, nothing useful. They didn't need proof aliens existed. They needed one of them alive, but even that wasn't the real prize. The real prize was what came to pick them up. A ship, a working one. Not another fried transmitter, not a melted implant, not some dead thing on a table with all the useful parts burned out. A ship meant propulsion, shielding, power, navigation, alloys, control systems, the actual machinery of how they move through space. Not theory, not guesses, hardware. So, we made me the bait. The breakthrough was real, but the timing was fake. The notebook was bait. The public lecture next week was bait. The little hints I dropped at work were bait. The house was the trap. The busted plumbing, trap. The new water heater Dina hated because I made the closet smell like metal. Trap. The landscaping crew that tore up our backyard for 3 days while Dinah complained they were killing her lavender. Trap. Under our house was enough human desperation to pull something impossible out of the sky. But only if she called them close. Only if she didn't just run. Only if she loved me enough to say goodbye. Do you get how disgusting that is? I used the thing I was angriest about. I used us. At some point, she looked down and saw my face. Not my fear, not my pain, my guilt. Marriage is a curse. You can't hide it in your own face. She stopped touching my hair. She whispered, no. That was all. Just no. Then, how long? I couldn't answer. She looked at the bag on the floor, the notebook, the candles, the windows, all of it, and she understood. I saw my wife die right there, without anyone shooting her, before anything fell from the sky. Whatever she thought we had, whatever little piece of us she believed was clean, it broke. Our marriage was a big sham. A trap with wedding photos on the wall and her hair in my shower drain. She was using me, and I was using her. We both had our noble excuses, but when she put her hand on my face, it still felt like home. The lights went out. Not like a power outage, like the dark had weight. The windows filled with white. The whole house made this deep animal sound. Metal screamed inside the walls. My teeth hurt. Blood ran out of my nose onto the tile. Dinah crawled off me and tried to stand. She was still trying to reach the back door when the sky tore open. I didn't see a ship, not clearly. I saw shapes where the stars would be. I saw the yard bending upward like it wanted to leave. I saw Dinah in the white light, one hand on the doorframe, looking back at me. She could have killed me then. Then the world punched itself inside out. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in me and 2 government men pretending to be doctors. They got it. That's what they told me. Intact enough. I didn't really care. They didn't tell me about Dinah at first. I had to ask 3 times before one of them finally looked at the other and said, she got out. I laughed because I thought he meant she had escaped the room. Then he said she had shed the human layer like it was clothing, like my wife was something she could peel off and leave on the floor. The other one said, you don't want to see what was underneath. I asked anyways. They told me what she looked like underneath. I could hear the disgust in their voices. Sorry you had to live with that, one said. Something soft and deep and awful twisted inside my chest. This one, in my opinion, fits the theme of this video the best, because this poor guy's wife ended up being a freaking alien. The next one's from r/nosleep from user Saturdead. It's titled, He Gone with the Light. Back when I was in high school, we had to move on short notice. It was just me and my mom, and she was struggling to keep a job down. After getting tagged with a DWI, we ended up moving in with my aunt in the projects. It was the only way to make ends meet. It was by far my lowest point. I slept on the couch in the living room while my mom took the bedroom. My aunt spent most of her time at her boyfriend's place anyway, so she was rarely around. It was rough, to say the least. Everything can be rough at that age, but changing schools and getting thrown down a couple rungs on the class ladder was a bad combo. I was a pretty normal kid. I played a lot of basketball, but I had no hopes of going pro. I had no idea what I was going to do. College was a pipe dream, so it was mostly about passing my classes and hoping for a miracle. Or a job. A job works too. The area was pretty bad. 1 corner shop with welded windows and half a dozen handwritten signs stapled to the front door. No carts or baskets. A couple of pictures by the entrance showing who's barred from entry. One of them had a little blue cross sign painted on with a faded RIP beneath. There was this sandwich place that must have been there since the 70s. The place was tiny, with a lowercase t. I've seen refrigerator boxes that are bigger. Basically, a door where you can hear someone talking on the phone, with a sign that says, yes, goddammit, we're open. Only 2 items on the menu, meat or no meat. I got nothing bad to say about that place, though. Mr. Barker's sandwiches are, to this day, the best damn street food I've ever had. I've tried recreating his pickled garlic salsa for years, but I can't get the zest right. Then there was the high school. There were metal detectors, and one of our teachers openly smoked in the classroom. The less I say about that place, the better. All that aside, it wasn't like you couldn't live there. I mean, yeah, it wasn't pretty. You can sort of feel the eyes on your neck when you walk down the wrong street, but once you learn what street you're not supposed to walk down, you're gonna be okay. It's not the kind of place where someone gets shot every day. I mean, it happens, but it's not as random and sudden as people from the city think. You know who's going to be trouble by the look of them. There'd been a couple of ideas of how to revitalize the area. There was an office at the far end that they tried to make into a sort of mini hotel. The kind of cheap place second-grade tourists stay at when they want the authentic experience. The place lasted for a couple years, but closed by the time we moved in down the street. There were still signs up when we got there, so it wouldn't surprise me if some folks got tricked into thinking it was still open. I wouldn't say I had any friends really, not at first. I had some guys that I knew, and that I knew wouldn't mess with me without a good reason. There was Kieran, for example, pretty stand-up guy. We made a good team on the court. There was Holland, tallest guy in the class. Nice, but a bit slow, and his hand-eye coordination was shot to shit. Guy could barely spell his name, but without him, we couldn't play 3-on-3. There were a couple of others too, but most of them blended into the background. When I'd lived there for about 3 months, there was a new push for revitalization. They put up new street lights, or at least that's what we thought. First time I saw them was on a Thursday night. People were out and about, someone was playing music, and I could hear someone yelling and whooping, but I couldn't make out which apartment it came from. I had homework to do, and I wasn't feeling sociable. My mom and aunt were out, leaving me to watch TV and procrastinate over equations. I remember looking out of the living room window, only to see a street light. At first I didn't think about it until I realized I'd never seen one there before. That had been a problem for my mom when we first got there. She didn't feel safe without them. At some point, the city must have fixed them. It was right there, bright as ever. I watched a guy come wandering down the street and stopping underneath that light, looking up at it. He raised his hand to shield his eyes. He seemed to be a bit out of it, so maybe he just didn't register what the hell he was looking at. Then the street light went out, just minutes after first spotting it. I blinked, adjusting my eyes. There was no man there anymore. He was gone. Okay. Gone as in like the guy disappeared, or gone as in like you just couldn't see him because it's dark? Anyways, let's continue. Over the next few days, I'd see the occasional street light here and there. Rarely the same one, and rarely for a long time. It's as if they just came on momentarily, and only a few at a time. It felt appropriate in a way. Of course the city would mess up trying something new. No good deed goes unpunished. People around school were talking about it too. It was a known fact that the only streetlights that actually worked were the ones near the school, so to see any others was noteworthy. Not just because it was something new, but because it seemed inconsistent. They weren't the only thing that had happened around the neighborhood lately. For example, there was a full wall where they'd cleaned off the graffiti. They'd put in new windows in a couple of buildings, they'd moved one of the broken down cars in the lot behind the gym. Little things, but enough to show that something was going on. Kieran didn't like it. "It's bad news," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know how, but it's all bad news. It's gotta be." Later that week, I was out with the guys. They were dropping by a house party and wanted me to come along to meet some new people. It was mostly Holland pulling the strings on that one. He was invited pretty much everywhere. We spent almost a full hour getting there, just because he got stopped by so many people he knew on the way. It was 10 minutes away at a light jog. It was a pretty chill party. I ended up with a lukewarm beer, sitting in a cheap white plastic deck chair, texting. Holland was inside, trying to figure out just how many people he knew there. Kieran sat in the deck chair next to me, but he'd already finished his beer. We were talking about school when a street light came on, just a bit down the street. There was something else in the air, something like static. My phone started charging, and I went from 2 bars of coverage to 5. I could feel the screen going hot. "You seeing this?" I asked, showing him my phone. "Told ya," he said. "Something's wrong. Some mind cancer bullshit." Holland came rumbling out of the house with what looked like a quarter bottle of whiskey. 2 guys were right behind him, one of them insisting he could take him in a fight. A lot of people wanted to fight Holland just because he was the biggest. Holland waved them off and walked up to us. Kieran pointed down the street to the light. Holland looked for a while, then took a step back. Shit, they got that working? I don't know, Kieran huffed. Don't like it. Gotta be brand new. Before I could say anything, he walked off to check it out. Kieran and I got out of our chairs and followed him. A little group from the party tagged along. The closer we got, the warmer my phone went. Like we were walking up on a power source. I stopped a couple steps away while Holland stepped right into the sharp cone of the light. It felt less like a street light and more like a spotlight. Center stage, he looked straight up, like he was staring at the sun. I don't get it, he said. It ain't new. There's stickers and shit. They probably just fixed the bulb, Kieran added. Nah, there was nothing here. You mean they put in a busted and tagged light from some other shithole? Come on, man. I don't know what to tell you, Kieran shrugged. Holland tapped the streetlight a couple times, shaking his head. The light went out. We went from burning bright to murky street corner in the blink of an instant. And when we looked a little closer, Holland was gone. At first, we were just confused. Not just me and Kieran, but a whole bunch of people. We looked around like he took off running. I called him, but I couldn't connect the call. Kieran snapped him, but got nothing. Here one moment, gone the next. While the others went looking for him and calling out, I took a closer look at the streetlight. I noticed something. There was no bulb, and the glass was broken. A moment ago, it had been whole, but we hadn't heard any glass break, and there were no shards on the pavement. That, and there were more stickers on the sides. Different stickers. It's like I was looking at a completely different streetlight. We walked around, calling out to Holland. Kieran elbowed me, showing me his phone. We walk this way, I get more bars, he said. Bet there's another light. Think he went there? Kieran didn't answer. He just shook his head and looked down. We walked around for a couple of hours trying to find Holland. He wasn't answering anything, and we couldn't get a hold of him. Some folks ended up calling his uncle, who he lived with, but he wasn't home either. Holland was gone. Out, like a light. Just like Kieran predicted, we found another street light by the corner shop. It was only on for a couple seconds, but in that time, I saw a stray cat walk through. It didn't come out the other side. As the street light went out, I made the same observation as before. It looked completely different when it was on. There were two different lights, one functioning, one broken. People started taking this seriously. A couple started to track the lights down and film them, hoping to see something weird. Others tried to dare one another to mess with them. I wasn't there for it myself, but apparently an older kid went missing the same way that night. They stepped into the light and they disappeared. This was no joke. People were calling not just one another, but parents, friends, family, and even the police. There were a couple of videos that started to circulate the group chats. Videos of a guy standing in the streetlight, making a peace sign, only to disappear when the lights went out. "I'm out," was the last thing you hear him say. They're laughing in the video, until they ain't. That first night, it just felt weird, but the next day, it was real. Holland was missing. People were out looking, calling one another, asking where he was last seen. I got 4 calls from people asking what happened and where he went, and I had to tell them all the same thing. One moment he was there, then he wasn't. It didn't make any sense, and it's not the kind of thing you can tell a worried guardian in a neighborhood where people have been known to get in trouble over nothing. Kieran went over to Holland's place. I wasn't along for it, but apparently he'd had a nice long talk with the uncle. All of a sudden, the streetlights weren't a fun quirk. There was something seriously wrong with them. While we were at school, someone called city management to ask what the hell was going on. There were no answers, and no one was willing to come down and talk to us. There were no squad cars going around, no one knocking on doors asking questions. There definitely was no project to get the lights back on. Instead, while most of us went to school, some guys around the neighborhood brought hammers and saws and took down the last remaining lights. The broken ones, that is. To an outsider, it must have looked like vandalism. For those of us who knew, it was a rare act of solidarity. Hell, even Mr. Barker was out on the street, leaving the sandwich place vacant for the first time in forever. There was this feeling like, yeah, this neighborhood was shit, but it was ours, you know? Even I, who just got there, was still part of it. We were in it together, and if no one was going to have our backs, we'd do it ourselves. But that didn't stop something strange from happening. Most nights, you could see the lights go on. Not all at once, far and few between, if anything, but they were there. Every now and then, someone would disappear. It could take hours before we noticed, but by the time we did, it was already too late. In that first week, we lost something like 5 people. It got bad enough that people outside the neighborhood started to notice. We saw new cars passing through, looking around. A couple of folks showed up at our school just to tell us we were full of shit. They saw the broken streetlights and thought we were making it all up to get attention. They didn't understand. But the consequences were real as real can be. Holland was gone from class, and no one knew what to make of it. Sure, people skip school all the time, but Holland wasn't like that. He may have been slow, but he wasn't negligent. He gave it an honest shot, and he was there every day, come hell or high water. Kieran and I had a couple of teachers come up to us after class, asking us if we knew anything. What could we say? He'd gone with the light, was the best way Kieran could describe it, like we keep telling you. Some people started walking in the middle of the street, hoping to stay out of the lights if they suddenly came on. Sure, people had always had a tentative relationship with jaywalking, but this was a whole new level. You could see an old woman with 2 grocery bags walk down the middle of the main street, and no one looked twice. It was amazing how fast people adapted, and how fast something turned from rumor to threat. But I guess if you're used to threats, another one isn't that surprising, no matter the shape or form. I went out with a couple of people every now and then just to see what was going on. We could use our phones to kind of spot where the next streetlight would pop up. You'd get a small charge and better coverage just moments before it came on, so you just had to pay attention. We usually saw them from down the street. Even if the light itself had been cut down and removed, a working one would stand there like nothing happened, shining down. Some people would run from them. Others would stop to take pictures, and once I saw a girl being held back by 2 of her friends, screaming at the light to give him back. We would do our part. Whenever a light came on, we'd throw things at it. Rocks, bricks, whatever. We'd break a couple. Maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. I don't know. But it felt good doing something. Anything. One evening when we were out looking, a signal came on, stronger than before. We were right by the corner store where the cat had gone missing. Kieran pulled me back as a streetlight a couple of feet ahead of us lit up. I could hear the crackling from it and saw a TV in a nearby house flicker through a living room window. The emergency lights on a parked car started blinking. And there was someone standing there. Holland. His skin was almost gray, and his lips were cracked like dry paper. His eyes were sunken and pale, full of dust. He was wearing nothing but shorts and a single sneaker. There was dry blood coming down his left arm. I could tell he had trouble breathing, like he'd been running or choking. Kieran was about to run up, but I grabbed him by the arm. Something felt off. The other guys filmed it. "Holland," Kieran called out. "Holland, what the hell?" Holland shook his head, biting down on his lip. He covered the wound on his arm as he spoke, his voice barely a wheeze. "Tell Uncle I didn't leave him," he cried. "It's screwed. It's all poison. But I didn't leave. I didn't go." "Just walk. Get over here," I called out. "Come on, let's go." "It's all poison," he said. "Dying's all fucking poison." Holland took a step forward. As his body crossed that sharp cone, something happened. Parts of his body dissolved in a dithery cross-section. Slices disintegrated the moment he left the light, swallowed by the dark. I remember the moment his face went from weeping to a death's head grin. His voice collapsed in a rattled falsetto, like someone poked a hole in his lungs halfway through a final wailing. Then the lights went out. Kieran freaked out. The others were too, sharing the video with people from around the block. I just stood there, trying not to piss myself. It took me 10 minutes to realize Holland's shoe and shorts were still on the pavement. This had been real. The proof was right here. Some people thought the video was fake, even though there were 3 different angles. Others thought it was some kind of sick joke, or a performance piece thing. Holland's uncle got pissed beyond belief. He showed up at one guy's apartment screaming his lungs off, demanding the video be taken down. Meanwhile, Kieran and I were making plans of our own. I figured if something like clothes can come back from whatever that is, then maybe we can film it. That was our working theory. Kieran got a hold of a spare phone from his sister, and we decided to give it a shot. We got a selfie stick and chased down a street light, hoping to time it just right. It took us a couple of tries, but a few days later, we nailed it. Just beneath the street light outside Mr. Barker's sandwich place, we managed to sneak in a recording phone. We put it on the sidewalk facing upward, making sure not to have anything but the phone and the selfie stick go inside the light. As it turned off, I grabbed the selfie stick and pulled the phone in. The screen was fried, but we managed to get the files off it. The video footage was strange. We'd only filmed for about 30 seconds or so, but the recording was well over 3 minutes. In it, you could see my face as I turned the video on. Then there's this bright light as the camera looks straight up. There's a static crackling, and you can hear what sounds like a spinning fan going higher and higher. You can hear Kieran and I talking in the background. Then, around 20 seconds in, the screen goes white. There's this crackling noise that rises and falls like an electric pulse. The white light would flicker with shades of blue and green, only to grow stronger and fade in waves. That's all there was. Kieran and I sat on a bench and turned up the volume, using one earbud each. We maxed out the volume, trying to discern some kind of detail. Kieran gave up on the 4th try. "What if we speed it up?" he asked, "or slow it down or whatever." "Why not play it backwards?" I scoffed. "Could be some Pink Floyd shit." "What?" "Screw it." We tried a couple of things, slowing it down, speeding it up, low pass filter, high pass filter. It wasn't until we tried a noise reduction filter then we realized that we were listening to. It wasn't a wave or a pulse. It was a noise of some kind. It sounded like someone talking. "An I," Kieran mumbled. "Sounds like they're saying an I." "They?" I asked. "Who's they?" "I don't know. Someone," Kieran shrugged. "Someone talking." I didn't like it, but he was right. It did sound like a voice, and it did sound like it was saying something. I just didn't like what I was hearing. A couple of folks were escalating things. There was this neighborhood watch kind of deal with some guys walking the streets with guns, taking shots at street lights that appeared. Some probably just did it for fun, but some of them were serious about it. Holland's uncle was one of them. Kieran and I didn't have the heart to hand him back the shoe and the shorts. The man looked like he was about to tear someone's head off whenever we saw him. We tried to do a couple more recordings. There weren't as many streetlights around, but we caught a couple. It got scary though. Kieran was a bit rough around the edges. He almost stepped into the light once. I had to hold him back. I think if you see something enough times, you start to think it's no big deal, even when it can kill you. Like he was somehow exempt from danger. We got 2 more videos, and they were pretty similar. The sounds we got were a bit different, and the length of the recording changed, but we couldn't get a clearer image. We tried putting the phone on the side, but it was difficult getting it to work without a working screen. We kinda had to guess where the record button was. After the 3rd recording, the battery exploded. It was a late Friday when I was out with Kieran, trying to figure out what to do next. We were standing outside the corner shop, but they'd closed early. It was getting dark, but we were keeping an eye on our phones. No sign of lights. We stood on the same corner where we'd last seen Holland. A couple of folks had put flowers on the sidewalk, mostly roses and a couple of sunflowers. The petals were already sprinkled across the street. "Think we can try again?" Kieran asked. "We can use my phone." "What's the point?" I asked, kicking some flowers around. "It's just light and noise. Don't mean shit." "So we just go home? Then what?" "Could play ball," I shrugged. "I don't know. We're 1 man short for a 3-on-3. A rose petal got stuck to my sneaker. I kicked it off with a sigh. "Fine, we'll use your phone." We walked around for a little over an hour. We heard a gunshot and saw one of the lights go out further down the street. I don't even think it was part of our neighborhood. It was way too far off. I bet a couple of innocent lights got busted in the process. Kieran and I walked around and around the block a couple times, trying to find something on our phones. Not a peep. Maybe the watch got them all. I mean, there had to be an end to the lights at some point. We ended up right where we started, outside the corner shop. Kieran was pissed as all hell. He was calling people, asking them to check their phones to see if anything was picking up something. Meanwhile, I was checking my socials. People were talking about the lights like it was some kind of urban legend. Even people who lived in the neighborhood were talking about it like it was an excuse. It was this attitude of, we know what's really going on, like Holland was some kind of gangster who had it coming. Didn't matter how many people came to his defense in the comments, the memes and shitty jokes were all that remained. After 10 minutes or so, Kieran put his phone down and frowned. Then he looked up. "Hey," he said, "your phone okay?" "Yeah," I nodded, 98%. "We've been out here for hours, man. It shouldn't be 98%. My hand felt warm as I looked down. I got 5 bars of coverage. Sweat trickled down my neck as my hair stood up from the static air. I realized I was leaning back on something that hadn't been there a moment before. Something metallic and tall. The light came on. My throat immediately closed off, like my body was protecting me from something. I couldn't even exhale. It was just this thick miasma sinking into my lungs. The light was blinding me, turning the entire world a burning white. I could see an outline of the street, even then. I could see a shadow of what looked like Kieran just a couple of feet ahead, but the world was too bright to make out the details. He looked like someone had spilled an ink blot in his likeness. It was the same neighborhood, the corner shop, the sandwich place, but it all looked different. Cleaner. Different names on the signs. More screens in the windows. Bigger sun in the sky. Kieran was moving around, but slowly. He was reaching for me, screaming something. It came through as this static, where only a couple of syllables made sense. He was panicking, but it was like seeing it in slow motion. I turned my head, looking for something, anything. I didn't even know what, just whatever could save me. My skin felt like it had been dipped in boiling water, turning from a searing heat to an icy cold. I could feel the moisture in my eyes and mouth evaporate, and the skin around my gums tightened as my teeth strained against the sudden pressure. There were people there, dead in the streets. Most of them made it a couple steps from the lights. Others were still sitting under them, as if waiting for them to come back on. One dead man looked more like a burned log than a person, leaving a seared imprint on the concrete. It had only been a couple of seconds, but my head was swimming. I could see heat swaying on the horizon, and the sky beyond as a distant mirage. It was midday, and it was killing me. There were no clouds, no sky. It was just a pale white in a black hole. Like I was staring up into an all-encompassing eye. Blood vessels the size of distant galaxies, an impossible attention turned our way. I remember trying to say a word, but I could only click my tongue. An eye, an eye, an eye. I took a step and fell forward. I'd slipped on something. Even now, I could see the flowers on the street, the rose petals and the sunflowers. They turned a strange blue and curled in on themselves, like dying bugs under a magnifying glass. Kicking out with my leg, I realized why I'd slipped. I'd stepped on something. Holland's second shoe. I kicked it. It bounced a couple of feet and lost its color. Maybe I was going blind. My eyes were swelling shut, but even with my eyes closed, the light burned through my mind. It was this otherworldly feeling, like I was falling, but not from the world disappearing beneath me. It felt more like I was growing smaller and smaller at such a rate that the air around me couldn't keep up. Something shifted. I heard a thump, like rubber hitting glass. Kieran had thrown the shoe at the street light and made it flicker, if only for a second. He yelled something, but I only heard the first word. Hold. I just lay there, trying to force air in or out of my lungs. I couldn't. It all felt like poison. This place was wrong. It was made for something or someone else at another time and place. People weren't meant to walk those streets or sit beneath its lights. It must have been some kind of mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. And all the while, something was watching me break into pieces. And I remember the last sensation of touch leaving my fingers as the concrete faded away. My mind was shutting down, racing 100 ways per second. Maybe that's what it feels like when you're dying. I don't know. Maybe that's what I was doing. It wasn't really panic or euphoria. It was more like anything, everything. The rubber taste of a pacifier, the smell of batteries, the feel of freshly made bread under my fingers, Like my mind was grasping at whatever straws it could find, hoping to keep me kicking for just a little longer. Then it slowed and slowed and slowed. Now, I've heard about this next part from some guys in school. No one knew Holland's uncle used to be in the Navy. No one knew he could hit a street light from all the way down the street, one-handed, with a handgun. He barely had to aim. He just pointed, clicked, boom, done. It was the only light he shot, and he hit it right on the mark, first try. And thank God he did. The moment the street light popped, I could feel a flush of cool air. It felt like I'd come up to the surface after a long dive. The moment my lungs opened, I exhaled this black powder straight from the bottom of my lungs. Kieran was already dragging me into the street, calling for help. I couldn't see anything. Everything burned, like I'd pressed my whole body against a hot stovetop and only just now released the pressure. Some people were running our way, calling out to us. I heard someone mention my name. It hurt when Kieran shook my shoulder, but it was nice to feel something real. When I finally got enough soot out to gasp for breath, I could feel the world returning to me. My thoughts mellowed, and the pinprick in my dry eyes widened. They had my mom and aunt come pick me up. They had to drive me into the city. By the time I got to the emergency room, I was so tired that I couldn't remember my name. I just sat there giggling like a goofball, falling in and out of consciousness. They probably thought I was on something. When I woke up the next day, I was on the couch in my aunt's living room. Mom was stroking my hair. The TV was running, but they'd lowered the volume. There was orange juice on the table and one of Mr. Barker's sandwiches, the meat kind. I remember everything hurting, my eyes especially. I could barely keep my hands steady, but man, I was happy. I moved out of that neighborhood a couple years ago when I got a job in the inner city. Some folks may have heard the rumors of those strange lights, but most thought it was a hoax. I think the total number of missing people was somewhere around 9, but at least one of them turned out to be someone who skipped town. Didn't really help the credibility of the real victims. If you talk to the right people and mention the right names, I'm sure they'll tell you all about it. Not because it's the most interesting thing in the world or the strangest thing they've seen. No, they'll tell you because it was something we managed to deal with as a community. After a couple of weeks, there were no more streetlights. We got them all, and they never came back on. Holland's uncle got the last one, and thank God he did. I haven't been there for some time now, but from what I hear, things are pretty much the same. Mr. Barker is probably closing in on 80 by now, but he still works the sandwich stand. Some folks leave flowers by the corner shop, and if you ask the right person what happened there, they'll tell it like it is. Holland, he's gone. He's gone with the light. I really enjoyed this story. This one is a really good fit for this theme too, because it starts out with this kid moving into, more of like a low-income neighborhood. And then the street lights end up connecting to another reality. I genuinely don't know how these authors come up with these ideas. Like, it blows my mind. The next one's from r/no-sleep from user Steve McNelly Fiction. My team got called to a supermarket that was abandoned for 10 months. The call came in after we had already gone to bed for the night. Our station's blaring loudspeaker alarm forced me to rocket out of a state of half slumber and sit up in my bunk. The words fire response came over the same loudspeaker as I looked at the alert on my phone and saw that only about 30 minutes had passed since I had closed my eyes. My phone read forcible entry, victim trapped inside a building, followed by an address that I didn't think anything of at the time. I wasn't terribly tired. I never really drifted into a deep sleep while doing overnights at the firehouse, and so I was able to step out of my bunk and quickly make my way to the gear room without having to shake off too much grogginess along the way. It was a cold night in the dead of winter, but my usual bunk room always feels like it's about 100 degrees in there, so I'd gone to bed that night in my usual attire of black gym shorts and a gray t-shirt. The gear room, on the other hand, tends to mimic the outside temperature with near perfect accuracy, so I mentally prepared myself to step out into the frigid winter air in what was barely more than a pair of skivvies. The cold hit me hard, and I couldn't prevent myself from shivering as I walked past Osgood and Fuller, who already had their turnout pants on and were busy pulling their suspenders over their shoulders. "Feeling a little chilly there, rookie?" Osgood said. I had been with the department for more than 3 months at this point, but seeing as I was still the newest guy on the payroll, I had not yet shirked that nickname. A bit, I admitted as I made it to my locker and began stepping into my pants. Maybe you can cuddle me when we get back, Ozzy? The guys laughed at that. Methods of tickling their funny bones had become some of the first things I had learned while working there. Once we all had our pants on, we grabbed the rest of our gear and began walking into the apparatus bay. Price, our driver, was already in the driver's seat of the rescue, his gear stashed in the cab where Fuller and I would be sitting. It always blew me away how quickly the guy managed to get ready during nighttime calls. The other guys all said that he didn't sleep when he worked overnights, and instead spent all night sitting in the bay, just waiting for the call that may not have even been coming. Fuller and I jumped into the cab, and Osgood climbed into the officer's seat up front. Price had the rescue peeling out of the bay before I even had my seatbelt on. You've got the address, right, Price? Osgood asked our driver. Price nodded. Yeah. Do you recognize it? Yeah, the driver said again. How could somebody possibly be trapped in there? I don't know, Price said, but I don't like it. What's so weird about that address? I asked, confused by their conversation. It's the address of that supermarket that shut down a while back, Fuller said. Not just shut down, Osgood said. 10 months ago, it was completely abandoned out of the blue. It's been closed up ever since. There's no way somebody could be trapped in there. Maybe some teenagers broke in or something, I said. What did the notes say? Somebody called 911 and said that they were stuck, Osgood explained. They said, I can't get out a handful of times before they hung up the phone. Dispatch couldn't get any other details from the caller before the line got disconnected. Maybe it's somebody pulling a prank, I offered. Fuller shook his head. The notes say the call came from the landline in the office at the back of the store. Whoever made the call definitely made it from inside the building. Price partially glanced in Osgood's direction while he drove. So, what's the plan then, officer? Osgood, evidently not finding anything useful in the digital system while browsing through the tablet sitting in front of him on the dash, flipped through the binder of old pre-plans resting on his lap. When he found the page he was looking for, he took half a minute to skim its details. We'll pull around back and enter through the door in the rear, he eventually said. You boys back there good to do some forcible entry? Yeah, Fuller said. He looked at me. You take the Halligan, I'll take the axe. I nodded. All right. Our conversation went dormant as we continued our way to the scene of the call. The frigidity from the outside world seeped into the cab as we drove, and I soon found myself shivering once again. Pulling on my turnout coat helped the cold some, but I still found myself wishing desperately that I could be back in that 100-degree bunk room. I silently resented whoever had called us out here on such a brutal winter night. We were almost certainly in the midst of being pranked by some kids. With any luck, we would arrive on scene and find them outside without ever having to enter the building, where we could quickly scold them for wasting emergency resources before returning back to the warmth and comfort of our station. We still had a long, cold night ahead of us, and I prayed to God that this would be our only call before my shift ended at 6 a.m. Osgood looked at Fuller and me in the rearview mirror. Get your packs on now, boys, he said. I want everyone on air. We ain't taking any chances with the air quality in this place, considering how long it's been sealed up. You think it's going to be dangerous in there? Fuller asked. Don't know, Osgood said, but it can't hurt to be safe. I resisted the urge to groan. Going on air meant we'd have to refill the cylinders when we got back. Of course, we could have just slapped fresh tanks into the SCBAs and left the used ones in the engine bay until morning, but if Osgood didn't insist on refilling them right away, then Price most certainly would. Our long night just got a few minutes longer. Osgood, Fuller, and I all pulled our SCBAs over our shoulders and began tightening the straps. Price's pack was in a compartment just outside of the driver's side door, so he wouldn't be able to get it on until after we arrived. None of us pulled our masks on yet. We knew we would likely have to force the rear door, and we didn't want to fog up the face coverings with the effort. We arrived at the strip mall where the abandoned supermarket lived and had to drive the length of the shopping center before we could loop around to the rear side. Much like our destination, Most, if not all, the storefronts along the strip appeared to be devoid of businesses. It was difficult to make out any details in the dark, but from my spot in the cab, I could see that several storefronts lacked any kind of signage or branding out front. And those that did possess these things looked to be in varying states of disrepair. The road we drove on, as well as the parking lot on our left side, were riddled with potholes that were stared down upon by row after row of completely dead or rapidly flickering streetlights. The entire place felt incredibly eerie. It was as if we were driving straight into an apocalyptic hellscape that existed only a few short minutes from our fire station. Price pulled around back, and we disembarked from the rescue. Osgood approached the rear of the supermarket while Price put on his SCBA, and Fuller and I grabbed a set of irons from the rescue tools compartment on the truck. We had also each grabbed a flashlight from the cab of the apparatus before stepping outside. They hung from our sides by the straps and gently bumped against our hips as we approached the structure. The building's rear wall was constructed of old, faded, crumbling brick. A single loading dock, complete with a rusty iron shutter, was carved out of a section of the wall. A couple of yards from this dock was a small concrete platform, accessible by both a staircase and a ramp of the same material. A metal door existed at the top of the platform on the same wall as the shutter. Osgood was already standing outside of this door. Price was climbing the steps while Fuller and I approached with our tools. I followed Fuller up the stairs to the platform and stepped forward, ready to shove the fork end of my Halligan into the doorframe. Price stopped me by placing a firm hand on my shoulder before shaking his head. "Don't they teach you to try before you pry anymore, rookie?" he said. I frowned, taking a step back. "They do," I said sheepishly. "Sorry." Osgood laughed. "I guess you can't blame the guy for being a little eager." He wrapped a glove around the door's handle, gripped the latch, and pulled. To my surprise, the door put up no resistance as it came away from its frame. Osgood noted my change in expression and grinned. "Don't look surprised," he said. "The caller had to get into the building somehow after all." "Yeah," I said. "I guess you're right." Osgood released his grip on the door and allowed it to fall back into place. "All right," he said. "Let's get on air and get this over with." We did as our officer instructed and pulled our masks onto our faces before we opened up our air cylinders. I heard my SCBA's low-pressure alarm ring briefly, indicating new airflow, before I attached my regulator to my mask. My next breath allowed a small blast of air to fill my mask and kiss my mouth and nose. We were all ready, and our breaths were coming in the form of slow, deliberate swallows. Osgood once again opened the door. Price stepped inside first, followed by Fuller and then me, with our officer bringing up the rear. The metal door groaned shut behind us, cutting off our portal to the outside world. All four of us clicked on our flashlights and began scanning our new equipment with our beams. We found ourselves in a tight, dark hallway. Its walls were made of plain, off-white brick, its floor a long stretch of worn gray vinyl. Thousands of particles of what I at the time assumed to be dust floated and flitted through the air all around us. "Fire department," Osgood yelled. His words sounded mechanical and distant through his SCBA's voice amplifier. When he received no response, he lowered his voice and directed it at us. "The pre-plan says the office should be just ahead." He led the way through the passage until we came upon a door on the wall to our left. It hung slightly ajar. The space beyond it was bathed in darkness. "This should be it," he said. Osgood slowly pushed the door open and allowed the flashlight attached to his turnout coat to illuminate the space beyond the threshold. He then took a cautious step inside. "Fire department," he called again. "Is anybody in here?" The rest of us stood in the hallway while our officer searched the office. All three of our past systems, the blaring alarm on our SCBAs that starts going off when we've been standing idle for too long, began to sound while we waited. We all needed to shake our SCBAs in order to silence the alarms, a process that came as second nature to us. After about 30 or 40 seconds in the office, Osgood came back out into the hall and closed the door shut behind him. "It's empty," he said, "but the phone is hanging off the receiver. It's got a dial tone." "So then somebody actually was here," I said. Fuller glanced down the hallway from which we had just come. But why would they need to call 911 when they were this close to the exit? Osgood shrugged. Beats me, but I think somebody really did make that call from inside this place. Maybe it actually was a prank after all, I suggested. Might have been, Price said. Doesn't change the fact that we still have to do a search of this whole damn place. How's everyone doing on air? Osgood asked. After confirming that we all had plenty of the stuff left, he went on. Let's get this over with then. If we're quick about it, we can finish our search without having to go back for fresh cylinders. He led us down the hall until we reached another metal door at the far side. This barrier was different from earlier, and it was already partially ajar. A strange fact, considering that the other door of the exact same type had closed on its own. This had evidently raised red flags for all four of us, because we immediately began to share glances with one another that we all knew indicated our concern, despite our faces being largely obscured by our masks. Side note, guys, what a small detail to notice, that the one door swung shut and this one didn't. These firefighters are very diligent. Anyways, let's continue. Osgood took a cautious step toward the door. He attempted to push it open, but he was immediately met with resistance. He then positioned his forearm against the barrier and gave it a forceful shove. The door still put up a fight, but with a little effort, he was able to create enough of an opening for us to fit through. With the space cleared, he took a step inside. The heavy metal door remained frozen in place even after he had left it behind. Jesus, we heard Osgood say from the other side of the threshold. Price quickly followed our officer through the doorway. Fuller went after him, and I brought up the rear. The space on the other side of the threshold was just as dark as the hallway had been, but our 4 flashlight beams did their best to illuminate our new world. More particles, thicker and more dense in their congregation, floated through the air all about us. They were so plentiful that our lights struggled to penetrate their haze, but we had just enough illumination to see that we were in a stockroom behind the main store. The walls, ceiling, floor, and shelves were all covered in a heavy layer of fungus. The mass looked to be one giant, perpetually growing organism that was constantly and frantically searching for more space to consume with its long, tendril-like roots. Looking at the ground, I could see that the door we had just come through had been forced to scrape along the fungus in order to come open. It was now held in place by the layer of fungus which had glommed onto the bottom of the door with the buildup of the material that had been scraped away. What the hell happened in here? I said. Good question, Osgood said. I've been in some nasty places in my day, but none have ever been quite like this. I think we're good to get out of here now, Fuller said. Anybody who made their way in here would likely have been dead within minutes of breathing this air. This clearly isn't a rescue attempt anymore. If anything, it's a recovery. All the more reason we need to press on, Price said. If somebody is still alive in here, then we need to pull them out ASAP. We're not properly equipped for this, Fuller said. We should be in hazmat suits in an environment like this, not turnout gear. Price shrugged. It don't make a difference anymore now, seeing as we're already in the thick of it. The Price is right, Osgood said. We need to at least check this storage area. If we see no signs of anybody being in here, then we'll pull out, call in hazmat, and get deconned. But we need to make it quick. Fuller, you'll search to the left with me, while Price and the rookie go to the right. Fuller sighed to announce his frustration, but he offered no further protest. Osgood looked at Price. Radio us if you find anything. The driver nodded, and our 2 small groups went off in separate directions. I didn't know what to say to my companion. He had always been the hardest person at my station to strike up a conversation with, so we remained silent as we conducted our search. We followed the mold-covered wall and weaved past shelves consumed by fungus. After rounding a corner, we came across a new metal door that was largely covered in the mass, and which was only identifiable by the handle that stuck out from the blanket of mold. I figured this door leads into the loading dock based on the pre-plan, Price said. He took hold of the handle and tried to open the door, but it remained firmly in place. Locked, but I doubt we'll be needing to go in there anyway. This door looks like it's been shut for a long time. Any potential victim in here won't have made it past this thing. We continued on for another minute or so before we spotted Osgood and Fuller. When we reached them, we found that they were waiting for us in front of a pair of swinging doors. One of the doors was slightly ajar. It was pushed away from us and stuck in place, just like how the metal door had been. "You took so long that I was getting ready to radio you," Osgood said. "We were looking at something back there," Price said. He glanced at the fungus-caked double doors. "I'm guessing you two aren't the ones that pushed that open." "Correct," our officer said, which means whoever was in here went farther into the store, which means we need to keep going. I expected another protest from Fuller, but the man remained silent. After another quick oxygen check, during which we confirmed that we all had close to 3/4 of our cylinders left, we continued on into the store proper. Osgood pushed against the stuck door similarly to how he had the previous one before leading the way into the space beyond it. I didn't think that the mold spores, could have gotten any worse than they already were. But I was wrong. They were so thick and oppressive that I could hardly see beyond their dense curtain. The haze partially reflected my flashlight's beam back at me. It felt as if I was surrounded by the smoke of a burning building, or as if I had been swallowed by a heavy, ravenous har. Side note, is anybody else imagining The Last of Us? 'Cause I'm imagining The Last of Us. An even greater quantity of mold infested this new space. It teemed in the shadows beyond the reach of my flashlight and oozed out of a nearby frozen food chiller, making it look as if the waist-high container was overflowing with ice. "Fire department," Osgood called out again. "Is anybody in here?" His echoing voice was the only thing to respond to him. "It's going to take us forever to search this place," Fuller said. "Not if we move quickly," Osgood said. "Same pairs as before. We'll go along the perimeter wall. If we haven't found anything by the time we meet up, then we'll begin searching the aisles one by one. Any questions?" Nobody responded. "Good. Now let's get this over with before we start getting low on air." Osgood and Fuller once again began moving left along the outer wall of the supermarket, while Price and I began moving to the right. I glanced in our companion's direction after taking only a few short steps and was slightly alarmed to see that the beams of their flashlights had already been completely consumed by the swirling mold spores. In a matter of seconds, it had become as if they had never existed at all. I walked with Price for another couple of minutes while sweeping my flashlight with one hand and holding my Halligan with the other. I had yet to use the tool since entering the structure, and I considered offering it to my companion, who held nothing in his hands. He, like Osgood, had a flashlight attached to his coat, but I decided against it. I feared that the older man would think I was trying to pawn the Halligan off on him, and I didn't want him believing me to be lazy. The silence in that space was almost overwhelming. It was as if the miasma of mold was muffling any and all ambient sound that would have come through, while somehow also creating a harsh noise that rattled my brain and threatened to destroy me from the inside out. The only sounds to break up the quiet were our soft footsteps against the fungus-covered floor and the rhythm of our regular mechanical breaths. I checked my cylinder's pressure again as we walked. It hadn't gone down by much since the last time I looked at it, but I was worried about suddenly going low on air in such an inhospitable environment. Of course, I knew that it would activate a low-pressure alarm before things got too dicey, but my paranoia told me that there was always the chance that the trigger would malfunction, and I would wind up sucking my mask to my face before I knew it. Suddenly forced to choose between imminent suffocation and breathing those toxic, putrid particles. Eventually, the silence became unbearable, and at risk of wasting more oxygen, I spoke. "What do you think caused this place to get like this?" At first, Price didn't answer, and for a moment I thought that he intended not to, but then his robotic-sounding words escaped from his voice amplifier. "Don't know," he said. "I ain't never seen anything like this." I glanced at some of the nearby freezers as we walked. Beyond the sheets of mold that fogged up the glass, I could see rows upon rows of ice-frozen meals still sitting in their spots on the shelves. "I guess they abandoned this place with everything still in it," I said. "Maybe that's what caused all this mold to grow." "This place has only been abandoned for less than a year," he said. "It shouldn't have gotten this bad in such a short time." I considered this for a moment. "Well, I guess it doesn't really matter what caused it to get like this," I said. "We're only here to find a potential victim, and that's all we have to worry about right now." Price nodded. That's right. Leave the more complicated stuff in the higher pay grade where it belongs. Glad to see you're finally starting to get it, rookie. We kept going for another minute or so in silence. I continued to scan the way ahead of us with my flashlight beam. For all the good it did me in that dark, gloomy space, the spore haze seemed like it was growing thicker the more we walked, and the more dense it was, the more difficult it was for our beams to penetrate it. It was for this reason that whenever I saw movement in one of the aisles from out of the corner of my vision, I didn't quite believe my own eyes. I came to an immediate stop and turned my flashlight down the aisle in question. Price, looking at me, did the same. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I thought I saw something moving down there." "A person?" "I don't know," I said again. "It could have been. It also could have been my eyes playing tricks on me. It's hard to tell in here." "We should check it out regardless." I hesitated. "Are you sure we should head off the path? We told Ozzy and Fuller that we wouldn't start checking aisles until we met up again." "It could be the victim," Price said. He brought his hand up to the radio mic strapped to his collar. "Price to Ozzy." There was a pause before Osgood's crackly voice came over the speaker. "Go ahead, Price." "The rookie thought he saw something down one of the aisles. We're going to check it out. We'll let you know if we find anything." "Copy that," Osgood said. "Just be careful." Price nodded as if the man on the other side of the conversation could see the gesture. "Always." The two of us began creeping down the aisle. Without thinking, I looked up at the sign above my head as I passed it. We were walking into the canned goods aisle. Part of me wanted to chuckle. The items down that aisle would probably have still been edible, assuming one felt so inclined to dig them free of the layer of fungus that guarded them. I couldn't say the same for almost anything else in the store. "Fire department," Price called, speaking that familiar mantra. "Is anybody there?" Silence. Price and I got to the center of the aisle, right about to where I had seen the movement earlier. We searched around the place with our flashlights, but we turned up nothing. As far as either of us could tell, we were completely alone in that passage, surrounded on all sides by preserved foods covered in an ever-growing blanket of death. "See anything?" my companion asked. When I shook my head, he brought his hand up to his radio. "Price to Ozzy. Turns out it was a false alarm. We'll get back to the outer wall and continue our..." The sound of crashing glass behind us brought his words to an abrupt end. Price removed his hand from the radio as he and I turned to look in the direction from which we had just come. On the floor a few yards away lay what I could just barely make out to be a shattered jar, its contents spilling out onto the floor and mixing with the mold that lived there. "You all right, Price?" Osgood said over the radio. My companion ignored the question. Instead, he and I shared a brief glance before we took a cautious step toward the ruined jar. "Hello?" Price said. "Is somebody..." His words were replaced by a sudden shout as his feet were pulled out from under him and he landed on his back with a terrible crash. Price began sliding along the moldy floor in the direction that we had just been facing. His yells were mangled by the harsh screech of his SCBA scraping along beneath his back. I rushed through the darkness after my taken companion, but he was moving far too quickly for me to keep up with him. He would have soon been lost to the shadows, but he managed to reach out and grab onto a shelf divider as he was pulled past it. The thing dragging him continued its effort, but he managed to hold on long enough for me to reach his side. Wrapped around his leg was a long, squirming tendril that stretched on into the shadows beyond where my flashlight beam could see. It fought desperately to rip Price free of his anchor, which he held onto for dear life. Dropping my flashlight and allowing it to come to a rest at the end of its strap at my side, I took my Halligan into both hands and lifted it up to my head before bringing the forked end down upon the angry tendril. Matter was severed from matter as both ends of the tentacle, now free of each other, writhed on their own. The end wrapped around Price's leg released its grip as it began to violently contort on the ground. The longer section quickly darted away from the blow and disappeared into the darkness. I took my Halligan into one hand and used the other to grab Price by the arm. He desperately backed away from the twisting mass as I helped him to his feet. After taking a few moments to catch our breath, we cautiously approached Price's attacker. It looked to me, in the dim light of my flashlight's beam, to be a tendril of moldy, twisting flesh, an unholy union, of fungus and meat. It continued to squirm on the floor, but without its main body to support it, its efforts were ineffective. Side note, this sounds like a level 100 nope rope. Like, I'm getting out of here at this point. If you went and got yourself lost in this The Last of Us grocery store, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What the hell is it? I asked. I don't know, Price said out of breath, but we need to get out of here. I noticed a sudden hissing noise, which prompted me to lean toward Price. My stomach sank as I realized that the sound was his quickly depleting air source. I think your cylinder ruptured when that thing attacked you, I said. We need to get you outside. Not until we find the others, Price said. We can both go off your cylinder for a bit if we need to. He quickly changed a knob on his radio. I'm going to contact dispatch, see if you can get a hold of Ozzy and Fuller. As he began his transmission to the outside world, I brought my hand to my own radio mic and pressed the button to begin my transmission. This is Search Team 2 to Search Team 1, I said. A few moments of silence passed, during which I did not receive the go-ahead to speak. Come in, Ozzy, are you there? I was met with further silence. Ozman, Fuller, are either of you there? I can't get in touch with dispatch, Price said. Something must be blocking the signal. No good on reaching the others either, I said. Damn it, he said. Then we're just going to have to... A horrible screeching wail suddenly came blaring through both of our radios. It was so loud that we could hear the original sound coming from the other side of the building. The radio was unnecessary to broadcast that cry of primal, desperate distress. That sounded like Fuller, Price said as we both looked in the direction of the scream. He had hardly finished his sentence before the blaring alarm of a pass device shattered the atmosphere all around us. Price didn't even glance my way before he took off in the direction of the shrill noise. I offered one final glance at the still squirming tendril of mass before rushing after him. I squared up next to my companion and together we sprinted out of our aisle and toward the source of the commotion. The pass alarm grew in volume and intensity as we ran until it finally reached its final, ear-splitting evolution. We rounded a corner and soon found ourselves in the midst of its almighty, overwhelming song. The sound was coming from the space that had once served as the store's meat department, a gigantic mass of writhing, undulating, mold-infused mass grew from the remnants of the department's display case, which had long since ruptured from the pressure created by the abomination that we now gazed upon. The mycotic mound of once flesh squirmed and lurched as its Stygian body continued to intrude into the space beyond the display. We quickly spotted the source of the pass alarm, the meaty silhouette of one of our companions. It would turn out to be Osgood, stood completely still as the wall of flesh consumed the last part of his body. His pass alarm became muffled as the mask closed around any remaining apertures through which the sound could escape. The screaming SCBA's flashing orange lights continued to gleam through the coffin of carry-on before they were too completely ingested. What looked to be the outlines of several arms, legs, and even faces stretched out from the squirming heap of mass. The muted, agonized groans of our swallowed companion joined a chorus of indistinct tones that called out from the tumulus of wriggling death. I can't get out, I thought I heard one of the voices say. I also thought I heard another one say the word stuck, but I couldn't be certain. Their words sounded more like the primal cries of panicked animals than the intelligent sentences of human beings. Mother of God, Price muttered next to me. Fuller stood at the very limits of this advancing mass. Several fleshy tendrils were wrapped around his legs and hips and torso and pulled at him as he desperately swung at his attackers with an axe. I rushed to Fuller's side and began digging at the tendrils with my Halligan. He managed to sever one of the muscly vines as I worked, but two more quickly took its place. They managed to easily dodge his incoming blows. One latched itself around his neck while the other splashed against his mask. The mask shattered with enough force to disconnect his regulator. I only heard his scream for a brief moment before the mass filled his mouth and nose and completely consumed his face. I instinctively tried to step away from the mound of twisting tissue, but I was stopped when one of the fungal tendrils lashed out and grabbed onto my boot. Price rushed forward and grabbed the axe from Fuller's hands, moments before the flesh had fully consumed its victim. He brought the axe down on the matter, creeping its way up my boot. I was able to pull my foot away from the larger mass and managed to shake away any meat that remained there, setting myself free. "Come on," Price said. He turned and ran away from the growing wall of carrion without looking to see if I was following after him. Needless to say that I was. I also did not turn back to offer our lost companions a final glance, for fear of losing all hope at the sight of the monstrous formation of meat that so desperately sought to add us to its ranks. We cut through the nearest aisle in our desperate flight toward the exit. Tendrils of matter rushed toward us as we fled. Each of us swung our respective tools turned weapons at our encroaching foes. Fungal flesh splattered across the shelves on either side of us. We didn't stop to admire the works of art that we left behind. Soon our exit came into view. I was filled with a fresh burst of hope that was quickly dashed into oblivion when I suddenly noticed that I was running by myself. I turned back around and spotted Price crouched on the floor a few yards back. He desperately hacked and sucked at a regulator that was no longer providing him with any oxygen. In my frantic effort to escape, I had not noticed the sound of his low air alarm. I didn't know how long he had struggled on while fighting against his need to breathe. A tentacle exploded from out of the darkness and wrapped around the arm holding his axe. I took a step toward him, but he used his free hand to rip his suffocating regulator free of his mask. "Go," he shouted as spores filled his lungs. 2 more tendrils grabbed hold of him and began pulling him deeper into the shadows. He didn't scream, even as they found the new opening in his mask and made themselves at home. I turned and sprinted away from my companion. It seemed to take me hours to reach the swinging doors that led into the storage area, but at long last, I finally stepped beyond this threshold. I continued my run, my breath coming in the form of heavy, mechanical gasps as I reached the partially open door that led into the back hallway. I didn't think I would find the strength to force my heavy, sweating body through that tight aperture, but I somehow managed to make it to the other side. The way outside was now in sight. All I had to do was make it to the other side of that impossibly long hallway. Something latched onto my back, halting my progress. My next step grew heavier, as did my next, until I could no longer move forward. Looking over my shoulder, I saw multiple tendrils latched onto the back of my SCBA. I desperately began tearing at my air pack straps while silently cursing the fact that the thing was so thoroughly secured to my body. Soon, everything was pulled loose, and all that remained was one strap pulled over my shoulder. I took one final gasp of air from my regulator before I tore it from my mask and brought the bottom of my hood up to cover the new opening. I then released the SCBA strap from my shoulder. The air pack fell backwards into the tendrils that so desperately pulled against it. In the same moment, I managed to sprint away from the lost air source and rush the rest of the way toward my exit. My lungs burned as I tore open the metal door standing between me and the outside world. I scrambled onto the cement platform and quickly slammed the door behind me. It wasn't until I was down the stairs and halfway to the rescue before I finally pulled my hood away and took a huge, gasping breath. Fresh air had never tasted so good before, but I didn't have time to enjoy it. I rushed to the rescue, climbed into the officer's seat, and reached for the radio attached to the center console. But my hand didn't even make it halfway to its destination before the speaker came to life with the anguished, tortured wails of my 3 lost companions. This one really had some haunted house vibes mixed with Stranger Things or something like that. Started off as a crew of firefighters going to check out an abandoned supermarket, and then that supermarket happens to be housing something completely unexplainable. The next one today is also from r/no sleep from user Unalloyed Saint Trina. There's a predator only the deaf can hear approaching. They've taken everything from me. Henry and I were born 6 weeks early. Mom says we came out looking like a pair of grapes. Our lips and skin were dyed a dull bluish purple, and she could almost fit both of us in the palm of her hand. It's an outrageously gentle way of describing 2 premature babies in the process of suffocating, but I guess that's Mom for you. Put more bluntly, Henry and I were born on death's door. We couldn't breathe, not on our own, not with the equipment that God loaned us. Machines were tasked with breathing for us in the neonatal ICU. Tubes as thin as coffee straws pumped microscopic gulps of fresh air down our throats, offloading our immature lungs, giving them space to rest and develop. For a little while, it seemed like the worst was over, seemed like we both would live, seemed like we'd both be normal. Then I bled into my brain. The vessels were too young, too fragile. One of them snapped. Blood pooled quickly, crushing whole sections of my brain against the inside of my skull. The surgeons told Mom I had a 50% chance of survival, but I'd most certainly be damaged goods if I did pull through. When our tempers flare, Henry likes to speculate. He thinks that if I hadn't survived, Dad may have decided to stick around. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten so overwhelmed. Perhaps he could have stomached the burden of a single, normal kid. Forces me to remind him that Dad bolted for the border the day we were born, a full week before my brain bled. He sprinted from the delivery room at the mere sight of us, his grape-skinned, breathless keychain babies. That said, cerebral palsy and deafness aren't the worst cards I could have been dealt. So what if my ears don't work? So what if my muscles aren't perfect? It is what it is. If we're to blame for Dad's abandonment, then so be it, but I won't shoulder the blame alone. I mean, that's what twins do, right? We split the world down the middle and share it equally, including the shitty parts, especially the shitty parts. Anyway, last week, for the first time in 15 years, I heard something. I heard them, digging through the earth, burrowing towards the surface, coming to hollow us out. 48 hours before they arrived. My eyes shot open. There was a strange pressure in my skull, a thrumming beneath my temples. Terror chewed through my chest. I launched myself from bed, strapped on my arm braces, and scrambled into the hallway to pound on Grandpa's door. Mom would come running at the slightest noise, but Grandpa slept like a corpse. The drive to the ER was torture. I had no idea what was happening inside my skull. I assumed my brain was bleeding. That murderous vessel was dead set on finishing the job. Henry bitched in the waiting room for hours because Mom wouldn't let him stay home alone. He was convinced the sensation was psychological, kept repeating the phrase, "It's just another Felix freakout." My brother didn't just say it either. He said it and signed it. Could have spared me the heartache by just whispering it when my head was turned, but no. He had to twist the knife. It hurt even more when it started to seem like Henry was right. My physical exam was unremarkable. My blood work was fine. The CT scan didn't show any blood sloshing around in my brain. The doctor's best guess, sinus infection. A freaking sinus infection. Listen, I don't blame that doctor. She was nice and she tried. The idea that I could be hearing again would have been an outlandish hypothesis. Wasn't like I was much help either. I had no experience with noise. I mean, I understood it conceptually. I knew the words. Screech, thud, buzz, boom, thump. But that's all they were to me. Words. Names of famous celebrities whose faces I'd never seen. Touch felt like a cousin to sound, so I pictured hearing was like having a set of big, invisible fingertips. Maybe a shrill noise feels like touching a hot stove. Maybe a soft noise is like running my fingers over a clean silk pillowcase. And what did this noise feel like? This thrumming below my temples. Well, I was rummaging through the attic last year, digging through winter clothes, hunting for a lost sweater, when I finally found it and held it up. Something shifted near the collar. A massive black cockroach leapt out from the inside of that sweater. It landed on my cheek and skittered down the side of my neck before falling to the floor and disappearing into the shadows. Chaotic, impulsive, unpredictable, restless, and willing to eat anything. Exactly like a cockroach. That's what it felt like. 10 hours before they arrived. Henry shoved a forkful of roast beef into his mouth before he started complaining to Mom. Talking and chewing at the same time made it difficult for me to read his lips. It was all too sloppy. Henry loved pretending like he'd forgotten that fact. I didn't catch everything he said. Why coddling him? You care of him forever. Not my job, protect him. If you're going to talk about him, in front of him, you damn well better have the respect to let him know what you're saying, Henry, my mom signed. Her hands moved forcefully, as if an evaluator was hiding somewhere in the room, covertly grading her clarity and technique. One of her chipped gel nails flew across the room as she signed the word respect. Shame writhed like a serpent stuck in my gut. I looked at Grandpa. He was scooping his fork over the table, trying to wrestle some meat, missing the plate again and again. My mom's anxious eyes caught me looking to him for comfort. Sometimes it felt like she couldn't stop watching me, even if she wanted to. "Phil!" "Huh?" he replied, still focused on fishing some dinner from his plate. "Your glasses?" Grandpa furrowed his brow. Then there was a burst of recognition. A eureka moment. I could practically see the dusty light bulb flicker dimly above his head. "Oh, right. A pair of thick glasses rested on his sternum, hanging from his neck via a gold chain. Mom made sure he was always wearing the necklace, but he would often take off the glasses and forget they were there anyway. He patted his shirt until his hand stumbled upon the glasses, then slid them on. His face broke into a warm, genuine smile, finally able to see us. "How was your day, Grandpa?" I signed. "Pretty good. Another beautiful afternoon to be delivering mail. Just between us, I think Miss Hudson has the hots for me. Don't tattle to her husband, though, all right?" He signed back. He blew imaginary smoke from a pair of finger guns and winked at me. I forced a grin and nodded. Henry's face contorted into a scowl, gaze fixed on his mashed potatoes, stirring them harshly. Grandpa was long retired. He hadn't delivered mail in years. Age had taken a toll on his mind. His memory had become like the weather, clear one day, cloudy the next, and the forecast could change on a dime. Despite his senility, the 76-year-old was remarkably spry, lean, and energetic. On good days, I was happy to know that at least his body was still intact. But on shittier days, his situation just tasted like a bitter irony. He had beautifully maintained machinery, but he wasn't always behind the wheel. I was beyond grateful that his ASL remained intact, but perhaps, more than anything else, I feared the inevitable day that would no longer be the case. I smeared a mushy tuft of steamed broccoli onto my fork. My hand abruptly went from steady to trembling. All day, the pressure had been sharpening, accelerating, intensifying. I looked around the dinner table. Nobody else appeared to notice. All the tests were normal. It was my sinuses. It had to be my sinuses. Try as I might, I couldn't buy my own story, and Mom could smell the panic burning beneath my skin. "Are you okay? How's your head?" she sighed. I pointed a half-hearted thumbs up in her direction. How could I burden her with the truth? Hadn't she suffered enough at the hands of my dysfunction for one lifetime? "See, he's fine. He's strong. Quit worrying," Henry signed. I suppressed the urge to smile. When I looked back at my plate, I realized Grandpa wasn't eating. He was staring absent-mindedly at the floor, head turned towards me. His glasses had slipped into his baggy t-shirt, tenting the fabric at his chest. He was muttering to himself. I couldn't make out most of the words, and what I did catch made no sense. Dirty little, squishing around, tangled. Disgusting, tiny, tangled strings. I did catch one phrase for certain. It was the last thing he muttered before becoming silent. "I see you." 30 seconds before they arrived. As we drove through town, the cryptic pressure in my head burst unexpectedly. Reminded me of popping an inflamed zit. There was a blip of pain, yes, but it was followed by a rush of blissful relief. I turned to Henry. He had his head leaning against the window, jaw stiff, shoulders tense to his ears. Guess I had a big, doofy smile on my face because he shot back a mocking look. Tongue out, eyes crossed. I imagine he would have flipped me the bird if we weren't in the car with Mom. He was livid. We were an hour late for his soccer game. Both Grandpa and I can be tricky to mobilize. Did we take our meds? Do we have our necessary outside-the-house gear? Plus, we just move slow. It's a miracle if we're only 15 minutes late for any given appointment. I wasn't the issue that morning, though. I knew better than to be unprepared on game day. Nothing aggravates Henry more. No, there was something wrong with Grandpa. Mom told me he was feeling under the weather. He didn't look sick, though. He looked vacant. Not his usual diet dementia aloofness, either. He looked like his soul had departed his body. His glasses had gone missing, too. And he was still muttering nonsense under his breath. Our beat-up sedan lurched to a clunky stop at a red light. I racked my brain, coming up with ways I could support Henry. I could make sure he stays hydrated. The light turned green. Our car wobbled forward. Or maybe I'd give him permission to lie to his teammates. Henry could tell them he was late on my account. That'd be bad for me in short term, but it'd probably be easier for him to explain than whatever the hell was going on with Grandpa. We came to a sudden, jagged halt. Old coffee cups flew from their cup holders, drenching the dashboard in stagnant brown liquid as the soggy cardboard fell apart. My seatbelt became rigid, biting into my chest to keep me in place. My woozy heart thundered into the back of my throat. We'd stopped at the end of a narrow, one-way street, hemmed in by two monolithic brick buildings. The right bumper was tilted down, and the tire was stuck. Mom turned and signed, "Stay." She stepped out to check the damage. My body trembled, nearly convulsing from the surprise of it all. Henry grabbed my hand. He dragged his thumb along the underside of my wrist, slow and steady. I felt myself becoming grounded. Outside, Mom was staring at the hood, scratching the back of her head. She peered through the window and gestured. "Pothole or sinkhole? Can't tell. It's very deep. Stay in the car. I'm calling the police." My breathing became ragged. A deluge of adrenaline flooded through my veins. The pressure hadn't left me. Suddenly, it was coming back, and it was coming back different. When Henry and I were young, before he was fed up with my existence, before he saw me as this loathsome, pitiable burden, we loved the arcade. It was a place where we were equal, despite my brokenness. Every afternoon, we would scour the house for quarters, hoping against hope we would find a cache of loose change between some couch cushions or in a pair of Grandpa's pants. If we were successful, we'd celebrate by shaking handfuls of coins in the air, making our closed fists rattle like Macarenas. The pressure was like that, rapid, rhythmic clinking. And God, it was pressing in on me from every direction. Grandpa leapt from the passenger seat and onto the sidewalk. He twisted around in manic circles, batting at the empty air around his legs, saliva dripping down the corner of his mouth, repeating the same word so violently that even I could tell what he was saying. Worms, worms, worms. Henry dug his nails into my flesh. Mom dropped the phone from her ear. She stood by the bumper, dumbstruck, panic setting in thick. Her head kept darting between the car and Grandpa. I didn't understand. I pointed wildly towards Grandpa, desperate to focus her attention. In his frenzy, he was getting closer and closer to the end of the one-way. He was going to spill out onto the busy road, and then, who knows? The man was basically blind without his glasses. Why, God, why wasn't she running to save him? Henry yanked my arm, trying to pull me towards him. I spun to look at him. His face was drained of color, paler than fog. His eyes were bulging from their sockets. Never in my life had I seen my brother more petrified, and he wasn't looking out at the front of the car. He was staring at something right outside my window. The clinking noise was deafening. It filled my broken ears and left room for nothing else. I couldn't hear the slack-jawed, dead-eyed man silently slamming his limp arms against the glass, one after the other. An endless, hypnotic barrage. And the glass was starting to splinter. I couldn't move. It wasn't just terror that rooted me to the seat. I was mesmerized by the vibrations under his skin. The flesh expanded. Spaghetti-thick cords would rise across every inch of his body. There was no order to their arrangement. They weren't stationed in parallel or in a neat cross-stitch. They were a chaotic, tangled mess. A second later, the cords retracted and his skin appeared normal. Expand, clink. He threw his flaccid arm over his shoulder. Retract, clink. It fell like a meteor, helpless to gravity, and shattered the window. A hailstorm of glass engulfed me. He moved to lean his head into the car. Mom bounded into view and tackled him at the waist. The clinking ceased. The world was silent once more. I gripped the edge of the broken window and threw my head out. Glass dug into my palms, but I barely felt any pain. I needed to see that Mom was okay. Relief surged out of me in a single, shaky breath. She was kneeling on the narrow sidewalk, stunned, trembling, but intact. What was left of the man lay in front of her. He wasn't dead. Dead isn't the right word. The man shattered like a ceramic pot. The collision had tossed him into the brick wall of the nearby building, and the impact had broken him into two large pieces, one from the chest up, the other from the waist down. Dozens of other smaller pieces were scattered around him, thin, rattling shards of dry human pottery. He was empty on the inside. No guts, no blood, no heart, nothing at all. The worms had hollowed him out. Mom turned, looked me in the eyes, and shot me a weak, world-weary smile. Somehow she knew, if she stayed still, she could buy us time. She could make damn sure we got away. Her hands reached up to a sign. The man's shattered body seized. The clinking resumed with a hellish ferocity. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. I could track their movements, getting closer and closer and closer to my mom. Henry was behind me, reaching over my shoulder, stretching his hand out to pull her in, to keep her safe. I pushed him back. The clinking was upon her. She screamed, I think. Her mouth grew wide, her jaw became slack. They were infiltrating her, hollowing her body until there was nothing left. Enough of her lingered to sign 6 final words. Take care of your brother, Felix. Her fingers contorted into a bevy of unnatural, inhuman shapes. Her body went limp. Then she began to pulse. Expand, clink. Retract, clink. For maybe the first time in our lives, Henry followed my lead. I shoved him out of the far door. He put his arm around me, and we left. I don't know for sure that Grandpa's dead, but I hope he is. Because if his heart's still beating, that means he's either alone, scared and confused, or hollowed out and somehow still alive. For now, it seems like we're safe. I was able to guide us out of town, avoiding the worms like landmines. They seem to cluster together and wait for victims, hiding in plain sight, but the only time they stop moving appears to be right before they leave or enter a host. Otherwise, they're always moving, which means I can hear them. Everyone's gone. The entire town is empty. We passed by hundreds of tire-sized holes in the ground. I threw a quarter down one of them. Henry said he never heard it hit the bottom. I think the hollowed outs slid down those holes. Don't know where else they would have gone. I don't know why they've awakened from their dormancy deep within the earth, but I suppose it doesn't matter. They're here now. These things are a living paradox. Only the blind can see them. Only the deaf can hear them. Nests of them writhed across my town streets, through layers of salt deposited for a snowfall that never came. They clinked up a storm, twisting and squirming and tangling in on themselves, but the salt never shifted. Indirect detection doesn't seem like a viable strategy. Want my advice? Hold your differently abled neighbors near and dear. Don't have any? That's all right. From my perspective, you have 2 options. You could roll the dice. Maybe this isn't the beginning of some sort of worldwide annexation of the human race. Maybe my town was just very unlucky. But if you'd like to err on the safe side, might I recommend a screwdriver? I mean, most people have a screwdriver. A screwdriver should be able to do the trick, no matter which way you take it. Blind or deaf, dealer's choice. And if the broken are the only ones truly equipped to survive this, sooner or later, we may have to shift our perspective on what it means to be broken. I gotta say, I really love stories that just flip your expectations completely, and this one really does that. And reality definitely wasn't as they perceived it. The next one's from r/NoSleep from user Saturdead. A beetle only I can see. A couple years ago, I went through a rough patch. I went through a separation with my then fiance after an 8-year relationship. And I was moving to South Dakota for a job opportunity. There were a lot of things breaking down at once, and I didn't have much room to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I was crashing at a college buddy's place for a couple weeks while I was looking for a place of my own. It feels strange to slow down enough to catch a glimpse of your own life. I hadn't taken a vacation in years, and all of a sudden, I had a full month of nothing on my calendar. I took walks, talked to people I hadn't seen in years, rediscovered some of the music I used to listen to. It felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life, but I guess that's what it feels like to breathe free after choking yourself for years. It was a strange time in my life, and it would change me in more ways than once. I used to take walks along the river. I just started listening to audiobooks, and I would take the long way back to my buddy's place just to hear more. It's strangely comforting listening to a story. I guess to a lot of people, it reminds them of childhood. Having a story read to us is one of the most comforting things I can think of. I stopped to tie my shoe when I noticed this acrid smell. I took off my headphones and listened to the river, but there was something else. A weak sort of wheezing, barking noise. Taking a moment to step off the path, I noticed the source, an adolescent deer. It was lying in the river, half its body submerged and the top half weakly patting at the grass as if hoping something would pull it out. It was covered in these nickel-sized holes, covering the entire side of its ribcage, and I could see something moving under its skin. It was dying, no doubt about it. I stepped a little closer, just to see what happened to it. The poor thing wasn't long for this world. It didn't look sickly. The wounds seemed physical and inflicted. I'd never seen a parasite able to do that kind of damage. The barks turned to screams, and the screams turned into nothing. After a while, it was just opening its mouth without making a sound. I could see its eyes searching me. It made me believe in a kind of fear I couldn't imagine. All these things, like losing your job or ending a relationship, it's all very human experiences. But what I saw in that animal's eyes reminded me that there was a kind of fear I'd forgotten, a comfort I'd taken for granted. Something was eating it alive. I stepped back as it took its last breath. There was this chill across my body, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. The shadows around me grew darker. I could feel something creeping across my skin by looking at this thing. Nickel-sized open wounds, dozens, blood in the water. I walked away with this unsettling sense of dread. I figured I ought to call someone. You can't have a sick, dead animal polluting the waterways, but more so, I didn't know what to think of it. Should I be horrified, scared, thankful to be alive? I got back to the path and put my headphones back on. I let the goosebumps on my back take over as I shuddered, shaking off whatever worries I carried with me. I raised my phone to put my story back on, when I noticed a little gray dot on my thumb. Just this tiny beetle-looking thing. Using my index finger, I flicked it off. But my finger passed straight through, and the little beetle remained. I shook my hands a little and continued on my way, paying no further attention to it. Apart from that, it was a fairly uneventful day. Had a chicken salad, answered some emails, and looked into some apartments. I had a good lead on one, I just needed a little more time. Luckily, time was the one thing I had plenty of. I have very patient friends. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I remember standing in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. Maybe my eyes were looking a little darker, and the skin a little loose along the cheeks. They say you never look at yourself the same twice. Age does that to a person. As I leaned down to spit, I felt a tickle on my right hand. Not much, but enough to make me look up. There was that little gray beetle crawling across the palm of my hand. I turned the faucet to medium and ran my hands under it. The beetle was still there. I turned my hand back and forth, up and down, and it didn't move an inch. After a couple of seconds, I was blasting it at max temperature, and the water passed straight through. I could see the beetle with my own eyes, but it's like it wasn't actually there. I put it out of my mind. I still had a story to listen to. I was going to go look at an apartment in the morning. I had things to do, places to be. I couldn't let my mind get preoccupied with little things that didn't matter. I had real problems looming on the horizon, and if I kept staring at my hands, I'd get nowhere. So I went to sleep, trying not to pay attention to what I think was a faint tingle on the palm of my right hand. I'd forgotten all about it the next morning. As I showered and shaved, I noticed a streak of blood across my cheek. Not much, just a tiny red line. I figured I'd accidentally cut myself, but on closer inspection, there was nothing like that. It'd been a perfect shave. Then I looked down at my hand. It was just a tiny little red dot on the back of my thumb, no bigger than the prick of a needle. The teeniest, tiniest little trickle of blood was running out, but it was already coagulating. And at the edge of the wound, a little gray beetle, suckling at it like a gazelle at a waterhole. Now, I've never really had a problem with bugs. I ate a worm as a kid, but that thing was messing with me. I washed my hands 3 times, and it was still there. I used more and more soap. I used a sponge and scrubbed until my skin felt raw. I used dish soap, a weird skin cream I found by the tub, but it did nothing. The beetle was still there, poking at the wound. Finally, I just put a Band-Aid over the whole thing. It took the beetle a while to figure it out. It tried to dig underneath, but the adhesive from the Band-Aid was blocking it. With enough effort, it probably could have made it through, but it had an obvious solution to this problem. It moved out of the way and bit me. Now there was another little wound, barely big enough to be seen, but it was there. I figured it just wasn't real. It wasn't reacting to anything, so it couldn't be real. Real things get washed off. Real things get scrubbed. Real beetles get squished and washed down the drain. Real things show up on the screen when you take pictures of it. This didn't. Ergo, this thing couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. Deciding that this was the case, I made myself ready. I put on my nice shirt and pants, got my car keys, and checked the calendar. There was nothing tickling the back of my hand. There was nothing biting me. I had real problems, and this wasn't it. For a couple of hours, I felt nothing. I went around town, checked out an apartment, and had a long talk with my would-be boss about my upcoming move. He was flexible and could give me a couple more weeks, as long as I kept in touch and let him know the second I was available. The whole thing was a done deal, but it's always a bit nerve-wracking when there are papers left to sign. I went to see a guy about an apartment later that day. I got there in my fancy shirt, trying to look the part of confident buyer. I shook his hand and noticed him looking down. There was blood on his finger. He'd accidentally touched one of my wounds. He looked up at me with this one expression of absolute disgust, like I'd spat in his face. He composed himself in the blink of an eye, but for a moment, I could see what he was really thinking. I apologized profusely, and he did as well, but I could tell it really bothered him. All of a sudden, he wasn't thinking about the apartment. He was thinking whether he'd caught something from me or not. He jogged inside to wash his hands, and I knew the whole deal was going to free fall through the floor. There was just no way. I don't think you'd be shocked to hear that I didn't get that apartment. When I got back in my car, I was furious. I could see the beetle on the back of my hand, circling a little pinprick of a wound. I smacked my hand on the dashboard over and over and over, but once I turned my hand back around, the beetle was still there. I brought the hand to my teeth and bit my skin. I spat and scratched and itched, but still nothing. At my worst, I was using my car keys to scratch my skin like a lottery ticket. But all that did was cause more wounds. The beetle didn't seem to mind that. It was an enormous source of frustration. Not only was it bothering me, but it was impacting my actual life. My buddy was asking questions about my apartment hunting, and it just got to me. We ended up agreeing that I could stay the full week, then I'd go stay at a motel. It all sounded very congenial and cordial, but I could tell he was just done with me. That's how a lot of things in my life ended, with cordial smiles, tilted heads, and practiced lines. My 8-year relationship had died the same way. No screaming or crying, just a well-timed "we need to talk" in a public place, as to not cause a scene. But this damn beetle was driving me mad. I couldn't take photos of it, so I tried to draw it. I tried to get a better look using a magnifying glass, but I'm a terrible artist. Still, I got a good enough look that I could recognize it from a photo. I scrolled through hours of images looking to see if I could find that one particular beetle. I never found a perfect match, but I think the closest description would be a sort of stubby, darkling beetle with a light gray exoskeleton and short legs. All the while, it was chewing away on the back of my hand, and I could feel every tickle of its legs as it moved from one wound to another, poking at the scabs. Going to bed that night, I could feel the heat from my hand. Not from the beetle, but from the way I'd scratched and itched at it. It looked swollen, even from a distance. I probably had to get it checked out if it progressed. But that line of thinking drew me down a path I didn't like. Laying down to sleep, I could still see the eyes of that deer. Those blank dark spheres, looking not at me, but the concept of me. Not knowing if I was a savior or a predator. Maybe it figured out I was neither. Maybe those barking noises were a warning to stay away, to turn around and run. I never really fell asleep, but I shot out of bed like I'd been kicked. I felt a bite, this time further up my wrist. Turning on the lights, I could see the beetle had grown larger. Not by much, maybe 1/6 of an inch. There was a slightly bigger bite further up my hand. It itched, already turning red. I was done with this thing. I was absolutely, unequivocally done. I would kill it, even if it meant chopping my own damn hand off. I'd had enough. I pulled out some ice from the freezer and dumped it in a bucket. I filled it with water. As I did, my friend walked out of his bedroom, hair still messy and a sleep mask tucked away on his brow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm almost done." "Okay, but what are you doing?" I sighed and bit my lip. There was no way of getting around it. I was gonna have to look like a madman. I turned to him and showed him my hand. "You see this?" "Yeah." "What do you see?" He looked a little closer. There was no way he wouldn't see the beetle. The damn thing was front and center. "Looks like a rash. You okay?" "It's not a rash, not a scratch. I don't know what the hell it is. You should get that checked out." I rolled my eyes as he lumbered back to his bedroom. I shoved my hand down the icy bucket, only to watch the beetle casually travel up my arm, find a warm spot, and bite down again. This time, I felt it. Over the next few days, the beetle was always on my mind. Everything else became this background noise to this immediate thing I could see on the back of my hand. I would get these specks of blood on my shirt, right by my wrist, and I would absolutely lose my mind with anger. At one point, I noticed it didn't seem to bite at wounds that were covered in something, so I rolled my entire hand in duct tape. The damn thing just crawled up my arm, found another spot, and bit me again. I tried everything. I bought pesticides from a garden shop. I used some stuff used to clean pools. I tried to cut off the blood flow with a belt, but ended up hurting myself. No matter what, the beetle had a solution. It would walk somewhere else, bite down, and keep eating. After a couple of days, it was big enough to cover the nail on my pinky finger. The same day I moved out of my friend's place and into a motel, I went to see a doctor. I didn't even bother telling him about the beetle. I just showed him the wounds on my arm. He ended up giving me a prescription for some kind of eczema medication and encouraged me to eat more fiber. But there was little else he could do. All test results came back negative. He recommended some generic antifungal cream, but I would have to wait until the wounds scabbed. I would get these bouts of rage. I could be going along normally and then feel that twitch of pain, and I would lose my mind. I'd slam my hand against the wall or beat my arm like a drum. I ended up with a whole bunch of bruises and cuts, and I was nowhere near closer to getting rid of that damn thing. It would keep me up at night. I could feel it crawling around, looking for places where the skin was soft and thin. And this one time, as it bit down in the pit of my elbow, I made this ugly grunting noise. My mind circled back to the ugly grunting of that dying deer. Perhaps it too had looked for a solution. Maybe until that last moment, it had tried to wash them off by throwing itself in the river. Was that going to be my fate? Dying from some self-inflicted nonsense while this thing ate me from the inside? It was hard to stay focused. I was barely getting more than 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night, and I found myself nodding off in my car. I'd moved into a motel down by the highway, but the Wi-Fi was spotty and I had trouble finding a new place to live. I could spend hours at the computer and still be no closer to a solution. All the while, my savings were bleeding out, and my would-be boss was asking questions I couldn't answer. I had this one constant tab open where, every now and then, I'd look into whatever long shot I could imagine to get this thing off me. Poison, radiation, X-rays, sound waves, there were a lot of ideas. The problem was, without knowing exactly what it was, there was no way to say what would work, and what wouldn't. But I couldn't show it to anyone, and describing it just made it sound like a sort of gray beetle. Then I had an idea. It was nasty, but it just might work. I had this cigar cutter from a friend's wedding the year prior. I hadn't thrown it away, but never really found a use for it either. I'm not much of a cigar guy, but it's kinda cool to keep something that looks like a guillotine in my pocket. I noticed that if I poked myself with a needle, I could sometimes get the beetle to move. It would always go towards the freshest wound, so little by little, I tricked it to go to the tippy top of my ring finger. I set the skin at the tip of my finger at the edge of the cigar cutter and slammed down. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. It burned. We're talking about a small patch of skin at the tip of my finger. The beetle tumbled off, rolling onto the floor. I backed away, holding my bleeding finger up triumphantly. Then it flew towards me. Turns out, this thing had wings. I tried to smack it away, but it passed through my hand. I tried running, but it passed through the door. I got in my car and drove, and it slowly came crawling from the dashboard right back onto my hand, still bleeding from the top of my finger. As it bit a nerve, I pulled over. I was in the middle of nowhere by then, and I just stood there screaming for a solid minute. My voice must have echoed for miles. I drove around, going numb from the pain. If all this effort was all I could do to slow it down a little, I was going to wear myself out. There had to be something else I could do. Anything. I experimented with a couple of things for a few days. Changing my diet, for one. I figured if this thing lived off of me, maybe changing what I ate could kill it. I tried a bunch of weird combinations, but nothing seemed to work. If anything, eating more fiber like the doctor ordered seemed to make it more active. A couple of days passed. The beetle was growing. It could easily cover the nail on my ring finger. I could feel the individual legs and the round mouth moving in and out as it bore into my flesh. The wounds had started to look like what I'd seen on that deer, round and cavernous. When you don't sleep, the days start to blend together. I would forget to answer emails and phone calls. Instead, I'd just sit in my motel room, hoping housekeeping would come by to change the blood-stained sheets. I'd begun wrapping my arm in a towel at night, but the wounds were getting big enough for the blood to soak right through. I was tired, exhausted, really, and it was starting to show. Looking in the mirror really felt like looking at a different person. I stopped answering when my would-be boss called. I stopped asking when friends and family called. When I started getting texts, I just shut the phone off completely. They weren't helping, and they wouldn't understand. How could they? I tried to get a video of the beetle biting me so you could see the wounds opening. It took a few hours, but I got it eventually. It looked sort of weird, but not like a bite in the video. It looked more like the skin was just contracting and releasing. Less like a bite and more like I took a big breath and something broke on the exhale. It didn't really show anything. I considered getting a microscope or some kind of macro lens, but what was the point? I had tried everything. Electricity, pepper spray, fire, acid. I considered that maybe I could cut my finger off high up in the air, but the damn thing could fly. It was too fast, too. It wouldn't work. I made a long list of possible ideas, and one by one, I crossed them all off. All the while, I would feel something stinging my arm, and this ceaseless frustration would well up in my chest with nowhere to go. The truth of the matter was, this thing wasn't leaving. It was going to eat, and grow, and eat, and grow. It didn't matter what I did, and it wouldn't matter what I tried. I made list after list after list, and it was all just a monumental dead end. As I panicked and cried and scratched, it just sat there, quietly eating away at my skin. People must have thought I'd been in an accident. Some of the wounds had gotten bad enough that I needed bandages. The guy at the drugstore started to recognize me. I remember booting up my phone to check a video I'd made, only to get caught in a call with my would-be boss. I had about a dozen missed calls from him by then. On a whim, I answered. "Hey," he said, "glad to reach you. We were getting worried." "Yeah, sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "I've come down with something bad." "You're sick?" "Yeah, it's been pretty bad." I held my hand up, watching the beetle scurry over the bandages, looking for its next spot. "We've been waiting to hear from you," he continued. "We weren't sure you'd be coming." "I'm not so sure either." "Sorry?" It had just slipped out, but I couldn't help myself. The beetle bit down, sending another jolt of pain up my arm. I shuddered. It was big as the nail on my thumb by now. Not that it mattered. It was a pain when it was small. It was gonna be a pain when it grew bigger. "I've been dealing with something," I said. "I don't think I'm getting better anytime soon." "It's that serious?" "I don't know. Maybe." The beetle suckled at the wound, perching its legs on the sides for balance. Not that shaking it off was ever an option. "You don't know if it's serious?" "I suppose it is." I yawned. I couldn't help it. I was exhausted. I turned my hand back and forth, watching the beetle hang on like it was nothing. "I'm gonna be real," he said. "We were expecting you days ago. This doesn't look good." "I might be dying." "You might be? How can you not know?" "I don't know. It's been eating me for weeks." I was referring to the situation as a whole, but looking at the beetle, I realized it was astoundingly literal. eating me for weeks. It wasn't meant to be a pun, but the moment I realized it was, I burst into a laugh. This loud, belly-bursting, manic laughter. I don't know at what point my would-be boss hung up, but I didn't care. I was laughing until I ran out of breath and tears rained down my cheeks. The laughter turned to a wailing cry as I rolled around on the floor like a toddler. I ended up lying there for hours, watching the beetle take one bite after another after another. It was sort of hypnotic, and after a while, you dissociate enough to not feel the pain. That's not your hand you're looking at. It's his. After that point, I didn't really care anymore. I stayed in my motel room, watching the beetle wander up and down my arm, looking for weak spots. It was sort of beautiful in the right light. Not really light gray, but more of a pale asphalt blue. Sort of like the novelty sunflowers they sold at the garden shop. I would lounge around, waiting for a genius idea to spring into mind. I'd keep my headphones on and walk for miles, forgetting to put something on to listen to. I just didn't want to hear my own grunts of pain when the beetle bit me. It had stopped growing bigger, instead growing longer, segmented. It was almost as big as my thumb. I didn't care, but the bites were getting harder to ignore. I got into this daily routine of cleaning my wounds, taking iron supplements, covering my body in bulky clothes. Thankfully, the motel room was cheap. At night, in lieu of sleeping, I would bounce between impotent rage and desperate crying. I would feel so sorry for myself, listing all the things I wanted to do if I could just get this damn thing off of me. All the while, it would just bite, chew, swallow, repeat. Lying on the floor, I remember waking up from a strange rhythmic sound. I couldn't figure out where it came from. I turned on the lights and realized I was shaking. The sound had been coming from me, tapping the floor. I rushed to the bathroom. My mind was racing 100 ways at once, but they all funneled into this one contracting idea. I was dying. I saw my black eyes in the bathroom mirror, and it was like staring that deer in the face all over again. It had known it was dying. Now I knew too. The pain got progressively worse. I started getting these big round wounds just inches apart, some bigger, some smaller, some with long strips of skin missing at the edge. If I tried to cover the beetle with my left hand, it had grown big enough that I could see the tip of its carapace peeking out the back of my hand. It looked so physical, but everything still passed straight through it. I hadn't even realized I'd given up. It just dawned on me that I had no ideas and nowhere left to go. I could go back to the doctor and get my wounds treated, but would it matter? Sooner or later, there'd be too many. I could prolong it, but to what end? Would I grow desperate enough to throw myself in a river too? I started listening to my audiobook again. I walked around for so long that I forgot how many hours passed. I wouldn't even notice the shivers coming and going. It was just nice to finish something. At the end of one of those walks, I remember sitting down on a park bench. At this point, I could feel every bite of the beetle. It was so frequent that it looked like I had the hiccups, sending my entire body into a spasm. I put on my headphones and dialed a number I hadn't touched for some time. My ex-fiancée. We hadn't talked for weeks, despite promising to be friends after an emotional breakup. It didn't take her long to pick up. She waited for me to speak first. Hey you. You doing okay? Not bad, you? I looked down on my hand, watching the segmented creature scuttle around, finding the perfect angle to eat. I know we've talked about this, I said, ignoring the question, but why did we go this way? What do you mean? It was 8 years. We weren't getting anywhere. With your job and my classes, we keep, circling the same drain, year in, year out. I nodded. I'd heard the same argument and even felt the same thing. It just seemed like a really long time ago. Is that such a big deal, though? I asked. Jobs, classes, yeah, it matters, but for how long? Until I retire? That's a long way off. Yeah, but that's coming too. Jobs end, classes end, but we could still be around. She paused for a moment, letting out a sigh. I don't think we can. I nodded. We sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch the distance between us a little further. I gave up after that point. I bought a whole bunch of gooseberries and just sat in the motel room, eating them like it was a job. They're rich in fiber and one of my favorite berries. Given the way this thing had reacted to me eating more fiber, I figured I might as well make a good meal. I was coming to the realization that I wasn't going to be okay. My arm looked like a minefield, and a couple of wounds were all the way down my shoulder blade. The thing scurried so fast from one point to another that I had trouble keeping track. If it wanted a particular spot, it would sometimes flutter from one point to another in a soundless burst of clattering wings. The fibers really kicked things into high gear. The thing got ravenous. I thought it was just a strange quirk at first, but it completely changed the way it behaved. It stopped taking the occasional bite and started digging down in a frenzy, not moving from one spot to another, instead focusing on this one particular hole in my shoulder, straight through the nerve and tissue and muscle, to the point where the pain was so bad I couldn't focus. I ended up on the floor of my motel room, screaming and bleeding all over the carpet. The pain had been manageable when it was just the occasional bite, but now it wasn't stopping. It was eating and growing so fast that I could physically see it. Someone called the cops. I have this vague memory of a door opening and someone screaming at me. Meanwhile, I'm seeing this creature the size of my hand scurrying back and forth over me, biting down and tossing its body around like a predatory death roll. Someone was shouting, "We need an ambulance." The creature was literally foaming at the mouth, some kind of anticoagulant. My wounds weren't closing, and I could feel this strange cold enter my bloodstream. Colors looked different, sharper, sort of. The pain slipped from me, not like an anesthetic, but more like I just forgot what pain was supposed to feel like. It left me feeling empty and callous, like there was nothing left that could touch me. The only problem was I couldn't move. Someone put on gloves and dragged me out. Someone else was trying to cover my wounds in bandage and gauze. There were flashing lights and raised voices. Meanwhile, this thing was taking bites out of me in front of my eyes, tearing up the skin for all to see. There was this one policeman trying to drag me out that dropped me the moment he saw a new wound burst open. I can't imagine what he must have thought I had. Meanwhile, I was nodding in and out of consciousness. Voices started to sound different. The sky looked strange. I was splayed out on a gurney, and it felt like I was already dead. During the ambulance ride, the creature settled on my stomach, tearing holes out of me. It curled up like a lapdog, now large enough to cover my entire arm. It wouldn't stop eating. The bites felt like nothing but distant pinches, but I saw the volume of meat disappearing into its maw. I looked one of the paramedics in the eye and realized I was making a sound. With every bite, I was making this reactionary noise, like a bark. I must have looked at them the same way that deer looked at me, by the river. For the first time in a long time, I could see something of myself in another. More so than looking in the river, we were both scared to death. I tried to speak, but the words didn't come out right. I tried to breathe, but the signals didn't reach my lungs. I was collapsing, shutting down. Little lights in the palace of my mind going out, one by one, as bite after bite took away some semblance of self. I was dying, and I could barely feel it, but a part of you just knows. I don't know where my conscious thoughts ended, and something else began, but I remember swirling colors and strange voices. Bright lights passed by, maybe street lights? A sky with strange moons, and people talking in unusual languages. Somewhere in the haze of expressions, little undercurrents of things I never got to experience, things I didn't know I missed. Eating ice cream, having a fragrant bath. Then, one bite struck a nerve on my neck, and I passed out. There are little flashes of life here and there, like a light swinging back and forth in my mind. In one moment, I'm being rolled into the emergency room. Then, someone holding up my hand, looking for a pulse. And that thing, the beetle, curled up on my lap in a spiral. Had it stopped eating? The next time I opened my eyes, it was dark. There were machines and wires and cables. The thing resting on my stomach looked different. It had curled into a ball, the head and tail sort of fused together. It was lying still, slowly bobbing up and down with the rhythm of my shallow breathing. No pain, no biting. I lay there looking up into the ceiling. The colors had faded. There was just this tingle in my eyes that, if I looked a little closer, I could almost see the stars in the ceiling. Maybe it was just random neurons firing randomly to keep my senses alive, but to me, it just looked like silver sparkles, and I was glad to see them dance. It felt like the blink of an eye, but then it was morning. People walking in and out to check on me. Someone had opened the blinds on the window. The creature looked different, as a light blue mold had crept over it. Then it cracked open. I saw movement, little things making their way out of the creature that had been eating me, breaking it apart like a cocoon. At first, it looked like a sort of mantis, until I noticed the wings. They unfurled, stretching out one by one and testing their tensile strength. There were about 7 of them in total. Just these little red, white, and black things covered in gray hairs. Butterflies. They didn't stay long. They polished themselves off and took to the sky, passing straight through the window pane and into the world beyond. In the days to come, the doctors looked for answers. Someone thought I'd gotten a flesh-eating bacterium, but it didn't follow any known symptoms. Once it was clear that whatever it was had gotten flushed out of my system, they focused on my recovery instead. I think in a strange way, giving up accidentally saved me. If I hadn't started eating more fiber, that thing would have killed me, just from the wounds. By accelerating the process, it got what it needed before it killed me. By the time I left the hospital, I had a journal full of question marks and a body full of scars. I was scheduled for a follow-up, but it was just to check on the wounds. There was nothing they could do to make sure this whole ordeal didn't happen again because they had no idea what it was to begin with. Looking back at it now, I feel like I should be angry. Like I should be cursing God for making something I can't understand that tormented me in such a cruel way. I know I should feel like that, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy to be here. I can acknowledge that shitty things happen and still be thankful that I get to enjoy the things I've taken for granted. It's helped me look past the calls and the emails and the diplomas. There were other jobs out there and other loves. I can't say my life is perfect today, but it didn't end with one turbulent upheaval. Not from a move or a breakup or a beetle. Life goes on, and sometimes that's enough. And sometimes on my way home, I take the long route. I put on an audiobook, and if I look closely into the distant fields, I can see something fluttering from one bush to the other, biting into meaty red berries and suckling the juice. Little gray butterflies with red, white, and black wings that only I can see. Key words, only I can see. I feel like that's what's so special about this story and why it fits this theme is because reality is so different for only the narrator. And I think that's what makes it so creepy. Anyways, that's all the Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. If you guys enjoy videos like this, go check out my main channel. It's just drovenmc or droven. Link's going to be in the description. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Peace.